Chapter 1935. I'll remember it in 1 second. Wonderful, no pop-up window, free read. The Leaf family was very smart and had no intention of going against the Sword Sect. They were resolute in carrying out the orders of the Sword Sect. There were many factions like the Leaf family in the Sword Province. After all, the Sword Sect had been established in the Sword Province for many years. Although it had declined, its influence was still there. Moreover, the Sword Sect's attitude was extremely unyielding. Many factions in the Sword Province knew that the Sword Sect was no joke this time. Most of the sects strictly followed the orders of the Sword Sect and began to investigate He Ying's whereabouts in their own territories. However, there were those who obeyed and those who disobeyed. The Green Bamboo Sect was one of them. The entire Sword Province was divided into two. One half was under the jurisdiction of the Sword Sect, and the other half was under the jurisdiction of the Bloodblade Valley. The Green Bamboo Sect was located at the border of the Bloodblade Sect's territory. Perhaps it was because it was very close to the Bloodblade Sect's territory that the Green Bamboo Sect had long since disobeyed the orders of the Sword Sect. Listening to orders, but not following orders, was the current attitude of the Green Bamboo Sect towards the Sword Sect. On the surface, they were still very respectful to the Sword Sect, but every time the Sword Sect's orders came, it was like a stone sinking into the ocean. There was no follow-up. It was the same this time. After receiving the orders from the Sword Sect, 3 days had passed. The Green Bamboo Sect still did not do anything. They did not even put on an act. They were not even willing to do anything on the surface. All of this was seen by the deacon of the Sword Sect. The people of the Green Bamboo Sect thought that the deacon had already left. However, no one expected that he had not left. Instead, he had been hiding at the foot of the Green Bamboo Sect's mountain, watching the Green Bamboo Sect's actions. In 3 days, the Green Bamboo Sect had not made a single move. The deacon was certain that the Green Bamboo Sect had not listened to the Sword Sect star. A cold light flashed through the deacon's eyes as he coldly muttered to himself, "You're looking to die." With that, he used a communication talisman to send the situation of the Green Bamboo Sect back to the Sword Sect. 5 days passed. It had been 5 days since the order had been issued. During these 5 days, the actions of the various sects and clans in the Sword Province had naturally been reported back to the Sword Sect. Now, Xiaochen already had a preliminary judgment about which clan was still loyal to the Sword Gate and which sect was already disloyal to the Sword Gate. Deacon of the Sword Sect to the Sword Sect's sex orders. At least on the surface, they did not dare disobey the Sword Sect's orders. Xiao Chun could naturally let them off for now. On the other hand, there was no need for Xiao Chun to keep the clans who did not take the Sword Sect's orders to heart or refused to carry them out. Xiao Chun sat boldly on the main seat in the Sword Sect's hall. He looked at Song Xing, Yang Song, and the other experts of the Sword Sect indifferently. The Green Bamboo Sect is quite interesting. The Green Bamboo Sect was definitely a classic example this time. With the order from the Sword Sect this time, the various clans would either wholeheartedly carry out the Sword Sect's orders, or at the very least, they would put on an act so that they could report back to the Sword Sect in the future. Only the Green Bamboo Sect did not even bother to do any surface work. It was as if they did not take the Sword Sect's orders to heart at all. This was already openly disobeying the Sword Sect's orders. Xiao Chen's killing intent naturally rose in his heart towards the arrogant attitude of the Green Bamboo Sect. When he heard Xiao Chen's words, Song Xing also spoke. Sect Master, the Green Bamboo Sect has actually been disobeying the Sword Sect's orders since before. However, the internal matters of the Sword Sect had not been resolved, so we did not have the time to pay attention to them. Song Xing knew about the Green Bamboo Sect. However, because the Sword Sect had no leader and Song Xing had to guard against He Ying, everyone had their own camps. Therefore, they did not pay attention to the small Green Bamboo Sect. Song Xing even guessed that the Green Bamboo Sect had already secretly sided with the Bloodblade Valley. After all, the Green Bamboo Sect was located between the Sword Sect's and the Bloodblade Valley's territories. They should have a lot of contact with the Bloodblade Valley. The small Green Bamboo Sect was naturally not worth mentioning to the Sword Sect. They had not paid attention to it previously because of the internal matters of the Sword Sect. However, Now that Xiao Chun had succeeded the position of sect master of the sword sect, the internal matters of the sword sect were basically settled apart from He Ying's escape. Although there were still some hidden dangers, it was no longer a big deal. Therefore, after hearing Song Xing's words, Xiao Chun smiled coldly. Since that's the case, let's take down this piece of rat sh*t in one fell swoop. Otherwise, it will spoil the entire pot of soup. The Green Bamboo sect had openly disobeyed the Sword Sect's orders, so they naturally had to be destroyed. For the Sword Sect, destroying the Green Bamboo sect was a piece of cake. After hearing Xiao Chen's words, Zhao Yu stood up and bowed to Xiao Chun. Sect Master, this subordinate is willing to go personally. Zhao Yu volunteered to destroy the Green Bamboo sect. Hearing this, Xiao Chun smiled faintly and said, Senior Zhao Yu, there is no need for you to personally deal with a mere Green Bamboo sect. Isn't this too much of a favor for them? Just let the elders do it. Xiao Chen's words were not exaggerated at all. As one of the sword sect's 5 great sword leaders, no, it should be the 4 great sword leaders now, because Yuan Lin was already dead. Zhao Yu did not need to personally deal with a mere Green Bamboo sect. After hearing Xiao Chen's words, Zhao Yu respectfully nodded. Then, on the same day, the sword sect was led by 3 elders and hundreds of disciples in attendance. They majestically charged towards the Green Bamboo sect. Xiao Chun did not care too much about the Green Bamboo sect. What Xiao Chun truly cared about was the people behind the Green Bamboo sect, or rather, the Bloodblade Valley. Song Xing guessed that the Green Bamboo sect had already sided with the Bloodblade Valley, but Xiao Chen was certain that the Green Bamboo sect had definitely and secretly sided with the Bloodblade Valley. Otherwise, how could the Green Bamboo sect dare to openly disregard the Sword Sect's orders without the Bloodblade Valley support? The Green Bamboo sect's confidence clearly came from the Bloodblade Valley. As a result, after the experts of the Sword Sect set off, Xiao Chun led Song Xing, Zhao Yu, and Li Sui to the Green Bamboo sect in secret. This time, Xiao Chun did not bring Long Qing, Xin Yuan Ling, and the Wine Daoist because the 3 of them had already entered closed-door cultivation. After Xiao Chun gained control of the Sword Sect, he naturally discovered quite a few good things in the Sword Sect treasury. Without any hesitation, Xiao Chun directly let the 3 of them enter closed-door cultivation. The cultivation resources in the Sword Sect's treasury were completely free for the 3 of them to use as they wished. Begging for a monthly vote, begging for a recommendation. Chapter 1936. Long Qing and the others had all chosen to enter into closed-door cultivation. Actually, they knew that their cultivations were too low with Xiao Chen's current status. After all, this wasn't the 8 Desolates world. Moreover, Xiao Chun was the sect master of the Sword Sect. Thus, Long Qing and the others were unable to help Xiao Chun with their current cultivations. Thus, instead of following Xiao Chun for no reason, it was better for them to raise their cultivations as soon as possible. On the other hand, Xiao Chun naturally didn't hold back at all for Long Qing and the others. The cultivation resources in the Sword Sect treasury were completely at their disposal. Xiao Chun wasn't worried that they would neglect their foundations in their haste to break through with such a huge amount of cultivation resources. After all, even though they could improve very quickly in a short period of time, he believed that Long Qing and the others would absolutely not do that. That was because they knew very well that such improvements were only temporary. If they really disregarded their foundations and forcefully broke through, it would probably be too late for regrets in the future. Xiao Chun didn't intend to interfere too much with their cultivation. With Song Xing, Zhao Yu, and Li Sui, Xiao Chun's group of 4 secretly hurried to the Azure Bamboo sect. Song Xing and the others were very puzzled by Xiao Chun's personal visit to the Azure Bamboo sect in the beginning. However, the 3 of them quickly reacted when Xiao Chun spoke of his intentions. Xiao Chun was certain that the Azure Bamboo sect had definitely secretly sided with the Bloodblade Valley. In that way, the experts of the Bloodblade Valley would definitely appear when the Sword Sect attacked the Azure Bamboo sect. Xiao Chun was going to meet the Bloodblade Valley. Since he was the sect master of the Sword Sect, Shao Chen naturally wouldn't allow another first-rate organization to exist in the province that could rival the Sword Sect. After all, ever since the Sword Sect had been established, the province had always been under the control of the Sword Sect. It was only in the past few years that the Bloodblade Valley had taken advantage of the decline of the Sword Sect and vaguely showed signs of being on par with the Sword Sect. This was something that Shao Chen wouldn't allow. Even if he couldn't destroy the Bloodblade Valley, he would at least drive out of the province. There could only be one overlord in the province, and that was the Sword Sect. It could be said that after hearing about Song Xing's plan, Shao Chen had perfected it. According to Song Xing, apart from capturing He Ying and stabilizing the internal situation, the plan this time was to eliminate a group of subordinate forces that had already become disloyal. However, Shao Chen's goal clearly wasn't limited to this. In truth, from the moment the Sword Order was issued, Shao Chen's goal wasn't limited to eliminating the subordinate forces that had already become disloyal. Shao Chen's true goal was actually the Bloodblade Valley. He wanted to use this opportunity to drive the Bloodblade Valley out of the province in one fell swoop, or directly destroy it. For this reason, Shao Chen had specially discussed it with Nangong Guan and the others. Nangong Guan, Zhou Song, and Wu Huan had already left the Sword Sect and told the outside world that they had returned to their respective sections. However, the truth was only known to Shao Chen and them. The only one who remained in the Sword Sect was Shao Chen's fourth senior sister, Xiao Xiao. Song Xing wasn't stupid when he heard that Shao Chen wanted to meet the experts of the Bloodblade Valley. He quickly guessed Shao Chen's intentions. For a moment, Song Xing's attitude towards Shao Chen changed slightly. If Song Xing had previously submitted to Shao Chen purely because of the heaven-breaking Sword Sovereign, then now, at least there was a trace of Shao Chen's ability that Song Xing couldn't help but admire. This was because even Song Xing had never thought of making a move against the Bloodblade Valley at this time. This wasn't to say that the Sword Sect wasn't a match for the Bloodblade Valley, but because the Sword Sect's internal structure hadn't completely stabilized yet. If they made a move against the Bloodblade Valley now, it wouldn't be safe. Song Xing wanted stability, but Shao Chen wasn't like that. Since he had used the opportunity of capturing He Ying to divert attention, why not do it more straightforwardly? Furthermore, Shao Chen had absolute confidence in destroying the Bloodblade Valley. After all, the Sword Sect, Family Nangong, and Sky Ju Sect were three first-rate factions. How could they not deal with a mere Bloodblade Valley if they joined forces? Most importantly, if Shao Chen could use this opportunity to take down the Bloodblade Valley in one fell swoop, Shao Chen's prestige in the Sword Sect would definitely increase greatly. This was also what Shao Chen valued the most. It could be said that making a move against the Bloodblade Valley wasn't a rash move on Shao Chen's part, nor was it a desire for grandiose success. It was a decision he had made after careful consideration and absolute confidence. The four of them secretly hurried towards the Green Bamboo Sect. At the same time, within the Great Hall of the Green Bamboo Sect, the sect leader of the Green Bamboo Sect stood respectfully in the middle of the Great Hall. In front of him, on the seat that originally belonged to him, sat a white-haired, skinny, and slightly hunchbacked old man. He appeared like an old man with one foot in the grave. However, in front of this old man, the Green Bamboo Sect's head did not dare to be disrespectful in the slightest. He lowered his head and respectfully said those words. Vice Sect Master, I've already received news that the people from the Sword Sect are on their way to the Azure Bamboo Sect. Oh, who's leading them? The Four Sword Heads, or the Song Xing? The old man asked with a hoarse voice. The Azure Bamboo Sect Master still replied respectfully to the old man's question. Neither. It's just that the three elders are leading them. 3 elders? It seems like the little kid sect master of the Sword Sect didn't notice at all. The old man laughed. Since the Sword Sect only sent 3 elders to lead them, it was obvious that the upper echelons of the Sword Sect didn't guess that the Azure Bamboo Sect had secretly sided with the Bloodblade Valley. Otherwise, how could Gao Cheng of the Sword Sect only send 3 elders to lead them? One had to know that 3 elders were enough to destroy the Azure Bamboo Sect, but it wasn't enough to go against the Bloodblade Valley. One had to know that the Valley Master of the Bloodblade Valley had the same End Realm cultivation as Tsang Xing, and the two Vice Valley Masters of the Bloodblade Valley had the same Dao Realm cultivation as Yang Song and the other three sword heads. Therefore, it was impossible for the three elders to deal with the Bloodblade Valley. Furthermore, the Bloodblade Valley had one of few experts to join them, and their strength had increased by 30%. Hearing the old man's words, the Azure Bamboo Sect Master nodded respectfully. Seeing this, the old man waved his hand and said, "All right, you can leave. Retreat according to the plan. I'll stay behind to guard." The old man's name was Ku Rong, and he was one of the two Vice Valley Masters of the Bloodblade Valley. His cultivation had also reached the Dao Realm, and he was extremely strong. This time, he had specially rushed from the Bloodblade Valley to the Azure Bamboo Sect to help them retreat. Hearing Ku Rong's words, the Azure Bamboo Sect Master naturally left the hall respectfully, following which, Ku Rong's hoarse voice sounded out in the hall, as if he was talking to himself. "Little kid sect master of the sword sect, let me give you a greeting gift this time. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 1937. The reason why the Green Bamboo Sect dared to openly defy the Sword Sect's orders was indeed because they had the backing of the Bloody Blade Valley. Moreover, after this incident, the Green Bamboo Sect had already decided to publicly submit to the Bloody Blade Valley. After all, they definitely could not stay in the Sword Sect any longer. The Green Bamboo Sect Master went down to prepare for the evacuation. However, the Sword Sect's speed was clearly much faster than the Green Bamboo Sect, and Ku Rong had expected. The Sword Sect had sent a large number of experts to the Green Bamboo Sect. Naturally, this matter could not be hidden from the other forces. At this moment, Wu Xuan's eyes were fixed on the Green Bamboo Sect. They all wanted to see how the Sword Sect would deal with the Green Bamboo Sect this time. Just as the Green Bamboo Sect was about to evacuate, three elders from the Sword Sect led hundreds of Sword Sect disciples and deacons to the Green Bamboo Sect after just one day. Hundreds of spatial cracks appeared above the Green Bamboo Sect. The three elders stood at the front and looked down at the Green Bamboo Sect below. One of them shouted coldly, "Don't you think it's a little too late to leave now?" Before the Green Bamboo Sect could evacuate, the people from the Sword Sect had already arrived. Upon hearing this, the Green Bamboo Sect's elder also led a group of experts from the Green Bamboo Sect into the sky and arrived before the three elders. In fact, the Green Bamboo Sect's strength was not strong. Even the elders of the Green Bamboo Sect were only in the comprehension state. They were not even as strong as the three elders from the Sword Sect. However, because Ku Rong was present, the Green Bamboo Sect Master did not show any signs of nervousness in front of the three elders from the Sword Sect. Instead, he sneered, "Elder, what do you mean by this? Why should the Green Bamboo Sect leave?" The Green Bamboo Sect Master did not show any respect to the three elders from the Sword Sect. Upon seeing this, a cold glint flashed across the eyes of the elder who had spoken earlier. However, before he could speak, an aura of Dao Realm perfection shot up into the sky from the Green Bamboo Sect's main hall. Then, Ku Rong's figure instantly appeared beside the Green Bamboo Sect Master. The three elders of the Sword Sect were naturally familiar with Ku Rong. After all, the Bloody Blade Valley and the Sword Sect had not fought much in the past few years. As the Deputy Valley Master of the Bloody Blade Valley, Ku Rong was naturally one of the people that the Sword Sect paid close attention to. They did not expect that Ku Rong would actually be here, and they were slightly stunned. However, the Three Sword Gate elders quickly regained their senses, and an extremely cold, killing intent flashed across their eyes as they coldly stared at Ku Rong and the Green Bamboo Sect leader. "Your Green Bamboo Sect has indeed sided with the Bloodblade Valley." Ku Rong's appearance here was enough to prove that the Green Bamboo Sect had sided with the Bloodblade Valley. Ku Rong laughed coldly when he heard this. His laughter was very hoarse. "Haha, a fine bird chooses a tree to nest in. Your Sword Sect is already at the end of its life. Anyone with a discerning eye will naturally know what to choose." Humph! The Three Sword Sect elders coldly snorted when they heard this. The three elders' cultivations were all at the comprehension realm. As for Ku Rong, as the Valley Master of the Bloody Blade Valley, his cultivation had already reached the great perfection realm. His battle prowess was comparable to the four great sword leaders of the sword sect. It was precisely because of his absolute strength that Ku Rong dared to be so unscrupulous. This was because he alone was enough to kill the people of the sword sect before him. A terrifying killing intent suddenly erupted from Ku Rong's turbid eyes. He looked at the people of the sword sect and said coldly, "Today, I will kill you all today. It just so happens that I'll kill all of you today. In the future, my Bloodblade Valley will personally attack the Sword Gate." Everyone in the Sword Province knew that the Bloody Blade Valley wanted to destroy the Sword Sect. When they heard this, the three elders were furious. However, at the same time, they were thinking of a countermeasure. They had no choice. Ku Rong's strength was not something they could deal with. If they fought head-on, they probably would not be able to gain any advantage. Moreover, after Ku Rong appeared, the other experts of the Bloody Blade Valley also appeared. Although there were not many of them, their strength could not be underestimated. With the support of the Bloody Blade Valley and Ku Rong's presence, the Green Bamboo Sect was indeed very confident. Facing the experts of the Sword Sect, the people of the Green Bamboo Sect were not nervous at all. However, just as Ku Rong finished speaking and the people of the Sword Sect were secretly nervous, an indifferent voice suddenly rang out. "I'm afraid you won't have the chance." Along with the voice, Xiao Chun, Song Xing, Zhao Yu, and Li Sui slowly appeared in the sky. When they saw Xiao Chun and the other three appear, the people of the Sword Sect were all delighted. However, the faces of Ku Rong and the others, as well as those of the Green Bamboo Sect, sank. Xiao Chun and the others had secretly rushed to the Green Bamboo Sect. Even the three elders of the Sword Sect did not know their whereabouts, so it was even more impossible for Ku Rong and the others to know. At this moment, when the four of them suddenly appeared here, especially when they looked at Song Xing, a solemn expression flashed across Ku Rong's eyes. Song Xing was an End Realm expert and was on the same level as the Valley Master of the Bloody Blade Valley. Now that Song Xing appeared here, Ku Rong was indeed nervous. His eyes flashed. At the same time, the people of the Sword Sect respectfully bowed to Xiao Chun and said, "Greetings, Sect Master." Xiao Chun nodded slightly, but his gaze remained on Ku Rong from start to finish. Before this, Song Xing had already told Xiao Chun about Ku Rong's identity, so he knew that Ku Rong was one of the two Vice Valley Masters of the Bloody Blade Valley. Their eyes met, and Xiao Chun coldly smiled as he looked at Ku Rong. "Your Bloody Blade Valley really thinks highly of small Green Bamboo Sect, to actually let a Vice Valley Master like you come personally. You are the new Sect Master of the Sword Sect, Xiao Chun?" Ku Rong said coldly when he heard Xiao Chun's words. Ku Rong had naturally heard of Xiao Chun before, and he had a better understanding of him because He Ying was currently in the Bloody Blade Valley. After escaping from the Sword Sect, He Ying came to the Bloody Blade Valley. With his current cultivation, the Bloody Blade Valley naturally treated him with respect and gave him a high status. Ku Rong also learned a lot about Xiao Chun from He Ying. Upon hearing Ku Rong's words, Xiao Chun smiled nonchalantly. He did not intend to answer the question, either. He simply said, "However, coming to the Green Bamboo Sect this time was not a wise choice, because I'm afraid you won't be able to return." As he spoke, the killing intent in Xiao Chun's eyes shot out without any concealment. When he heard this, a cold glint flashed in Ku Rong's eyes. He indeed did not expect that Xiao Chun would actually come personally, and even bring along Song Xing, Zhao Yu, and Li Sui. If he had known earlier, he would definitely not have continued to stay in the Green Bamboo Sect. After all, with his cultivation, he was simply no match for Song Xing. Moreover, there was also Zhao Yu and Li Sui, whose strength was not any weaker than his. A cold glint flashed in Xiao Chun's eyes, but he did not give Ku Rong any chance. He glanced at Song Xing. When he saw this, Song Xing immediately shouted coldly, "Kill!" begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1938. I'll remember it in a second. Wonderful, no pop-up window, free read. Song Xing shouted coldly and immediately attacked Ku Rong. At the same time, the other experts from the sword sect, including Zhao Yu and Li Sui, also charged into the green bamboo sect. This time, Xiao Chun did not show any mercy to the green bamboo sect. Therefore, he naturally killed everyone in the green bamboo sect without mercy. The sword sect's deterrence to the other subordinate forces was getting weaker and weaker. This time, the green bamboo sect had openly disobeyed the sword sect's orders. It was a good opportunity to make an example out of them. Ku Rong was fiercely held back by Song Xing naturally. The people from the green bamboo sect could not stop the attacks from the sword sect. For a time, the green bamboo sect was filled with wails as the experts from the green bamboo sect were killed one after another. Compared to the sword sect, the green bamboo sect's strength was indeed too weak. Both sides were not on the same level at all. Therefore, the destruction of the green bamboo sect was nothing to the sword sect. Xiao Chun did not make a move because there was no need for him to. Standing in the sky and watching the experts from the green bamboo sect being killed one after another, Xiao Chen's eyes showed no mercy at all. The battle did not last long. The green bamboo sect's resistance was completely useless against the people from the sword sect. Soon, only Ku Rong's side was still bitterly holding on in the end. However, Ku Rong was obviously not a match for Song Xing. Ku Rong, who was only at the Dao realm, could not possibly be a match for Song Xing. Ku Rong's injuries were getting worse as he bitterly held on. Looking at Song Xing, Ku Rong shouted coldly, "Song Xing, you can't kill me. Do you want the Bloody Blade Valley to go to war with the sword sect?" Ku Rong had completely miscalculated this time. He did not expect that Xiao Chun would actually personally lead Song Xing and the other two to the green bamboo sect. If he had known this, Ku Rong would not have cared about the green bamboo sect and would have left long ago. Unfortunately, there was no medicine for regret in this world. Hearing Ku Rong's words, Song Xing replied coldly, "Let's go to war then. Do you think I'll be afraid of the Bloody Blade Valley?" The Blood Saber Valley's development in the past few years was indeed pretty good. However, compared to the Sword Gate, the Blood Saber Valley's foundation was indeed much weaker. Previously, it was also because of the Sword Gate that the Blood Saber Valley had been able to seize the opportunity and quickly rise up. However, now that the internal problems of the Sword Sect had been resolved and Xiao Chun had successfully secured the position of Sect Master, the Sword Sect naturally did not fear the Bloody Blade Valley. Furthermore, according to Xiao Chun, even if the Bloody Blade Valley did not attack the Sword Sect this time, the Sword Sect would probably attack the Bloody Blade Valley. As the only overlord of the Sword Sect, how could the Sword Sect tolerate the existence of the Bloody Blade Valley? How could they allow others to sleep beside them? Therefore, Ku Rong's threat was completely useless against Song Xing. Song Xing's attacks became even fiercer as soon as he said that. It was as if he would not stop until he killed Ku Rong. Ku Rong could be said to be miserable in the face of Song Xing's fierce attacks. Although he was trying his best to persevere, the difference in strength made Ku Rong feel increasingly powerless. He definitely could not defeat Song Xing, but even if he wanted to run, Ku Rong had no chance at all. Unless Ku Rong had a spatial compass, he definitely had no chance. However, a spatial compass was really precious. Even the Sword Sect did not have many of them, let alone the Bloody Blade Valley. Therefore, Ku Rong did not have a spatial compass with him. Without a spatial compass, it was almost impossible for Ku Rong to escape from Song Xing. The two of them fought fiercely for several hours. In the end, Ku Rong was unwillingly killed by Song Xing. With Ku Rong's death, the Green Bamboo Sect was completely destroyed. At that moment, Song Xing, Zhao Yu, and Li Sui stood respectfully in front of Xiao Chun in the main hall of the Green Bamboo Sect. Xiao Chun sat boldly on the seat of the Green Bamboo Sect's Sect Master. Xiao Chun smiled faintly as he looked at the three of them. "You can have Qianling bring his men over." The entire Green Bamboo Sect had been massacred by the Sword Sect. Now that Xiao Chun had asked Qianling to bring his men to the Green Bamboo Sect, his intention was very clear. He wanted to start a war with the Bloody Blade Valley. The Bloody Blade Valley would naturally not let the matter rest after killing one of the two vice valley masters of the Bloody Blade Valley. Shao Chun had no intention of backing down either. The Green Bamboo Sect was clearly the best place to start a war with the Bloody Blade Valley because it was close to the Bloody Blade Valley. If the Bloody Blade Valley launched a large-scale attack, they would have to pass through the Green Bamboo Sect. As a result, Shao Chun had moved all the experts of the Sword Sect to the Green Bamboo Sect to await the Bloody Blade Valley's arrival. Song Xing and the other two immediately nodded respectfully as they understood Shao Chun's intentions. They did not leave the Green Bamboo Sect. On the contrary, Shao Chun's group stayed in the Green Bamboo Sect and waited for the Bloody Blade Valley's response. At the same time, on the second day after the Green Bamboo Sect's destruction, all the subordinate forces of the Sword Sect were extremely shocked. When they heard the news of the Green Bamboo Sect's destruction, all of them had different thoughts. They could not help but become nervous. It could not be helped. This time, the Sword Sect's methods were too forceful. Many forces had heard about the Green Bamboo Sect's disobedience to the Sword Sect's orders. However, no one had expected the Sword Sect to destroy the Green Bamboo Sect so straightforwardly. Moreover, it was said that they did not leave a single person alive. From the Green Bamboo Sect's sect master to the Green Bamboo Sect's disciples, not a single person survived or escaped. They were all killed. Shao Chun's goal of destroying the Green Bamboo Sect was to kill one as a warning to the others. Now, it seemed that he had achieved his goal. Along with the destruction of the Green Bamboo Sect, the affiliated sects that were once disloyal to the Sword's Gate, or rather, wavering, were now extremely nervous. This was because they did not know whether the Sword Sect would act against them in the next moment. After the incident with the Green Bamboo Sect, many forces had already understood that the new sect master of the Sword Sect was definitely a decisive person. He had used slaughter to fiercely intimidate the major forces under the Sword Sect. He had also clearly told everyone that although the Sword Sect was weak, it was still not something they could contend against. The Sword Sect could easily destroy a force like them. Look at the Green Bamboo Sect. It could be said that they did not have the slightest ability to fight back. They were uprooted by the Sword Sect in the blink of an eye. Shao Chun had used the simplest and most brutal method to tell the subordinate forces that as a subordinate force of the Sword Sect in the Jian province, it was best not to be disloyal. Moreover, they should not be like the Green Bamboo Sect. Otherwise, there would only be one outcome, and that was destruction. With the destruction of the Green Bamboo Sect, all the subordinate forces of the Sword Sect strictly followed the orders of the Sword Sect and began to search for He Ying's whereabouts with all their might. They did not dare to be perfunctory or careless. At the same time, the various subordinate forces sent people to the Sword Sect and offered many treasures. Their goal was to curry favor with the Sword Sect, begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1939. Shao Chun, Song Xing, and the other higher-ups of the Sword Sect saw the changes in the subordinate forces. Of course, this was what everyone wanted to see. This time, the Sword's Gate's thunderous strike and annihilation of the Green Bamboo Sect had indeed served as a great deterrent to the other subsidiary forces. For the time being, these people were deterred. Next, Shao Chun and the Sword Sect would have to face the Bloody Blade Valley's counterattack. However, Shao Chun did not care much about this. Although Shao Chun's cultivation was only at the Celestial Emperor realm, Shao Chun had a strong background. As Jun Wuya's last disciple, this identity alone was enough to deter the Bloody Blade Valley from making any moves. In addition, Shao Chun had 4 senior brothers and senior sisters. It should not be too difficult to destroy the Bloody Blade Valley. Of course, the Bloody Blade Valley was not stupid. Therefore, after learning that the Green Bamboo Sect had been destroyed and that Ku Rong had been killed, the Bloody Blade Valley did not make any moves even after 3 days had passed. Shao Chun remained in the Green Bamboo Sect for the time being. While waiting for the Bloody Blade Valley's response, he did not slack off on his cultivation. Although Shao Chun's current status was no longer what it used to be, and As the clan master of the Sword Gate, it could be said that he was considered a tyrant in the Great Thousand World. However, Xiaoqian knew very well that compared to his status, his strength was still too weak, especially when compared to the clan master of the Sword Gate. While dealing with the sword sex matters, Xiaoqian also had to raise his cultivation as soon as possible. Only when he had the strength to stand proudly in the Great Thousand World could he lead the sword sect to greater heights. Although Nangong Guan and the others would spare no effort to help him, they could only help him for a while, but they could not help him forever. One had to be strong enough to forge iron. Xiaoqian cultivated diligently. At the same time, he instructed Song Xing and the others to closely monitor the movements of the Bloodblade Valley. While Xiaoqian was waiting for the Bloodblade Valley's response, on the other side, in the main hall of the Bloodblade Valley, 3 days had passed. The Bloodblade Valley had not reacted to the sword sex actions at all. On this day, He Ying and a middle-aged man were sitting across from each other in the main hall of the Bloodblade Valley. Back then, when he escaped from the sword sect, He Ying had directly come to the Bloodblade Valley. Furthermore, he had already joined the Bloodblade Valley. Looking at the middle-aged man in front of him, He Ying said with a cold expression, "Now is not the time to act against the sword sect." The middle-aged man sitting opposite He Ying was the valley head of Bloodblade Valley. Like He Ying, he was an end-realm expert called Lin Gang. Hearing He Ying's words, Lin Gang's expression did not change much. He just said calmly, "Now is not the time to act against the sword sect, but whether or not the sword sect's little sect leader will act against us." When he was in withered glory, He Ying had always advocated not to start a war with the sword sect because the time was not right. He Ying knew that Xiaoqian was Jun Wuya's disciple. Furthermore, when he escaped from the sword sect, Nangong Guan, Zhou Song, and Wu Huan were all present and had even acted. If they were to act against the sword sect now, it would mean that the Bloodblade Valley would have to face the sword sect, family Nangong, and Tianju's sect at the same time. With the Bloodblade Valley's strength, they obviously had no chance of winning against these 3 top powers. Thus, He Ying did not agree to start a war with the sword sect at this time. Lin Gang knew the logic behind He Ying's opinion. To be able to develop the Bloodblade Valley to such a stage and be able to stand up against the sword sect, Lin Gang was naturally not an ordinary person. He knew the consequences of starting a war with the sword sect now. However, just as he said, the problem now was not whether or not the Bloodblade Valley should start a war with the sword sect, but whether or not the sword sect was willing to let the Bloodblade Valley go. With family Nangong, Tianju's sect, and Wu Huan, the sword sect definitely had the ability to destroy the Bloodblade Valley. Based on a relationship between the Bloodblade Valley and the sword sect in the past, how could the sword sect give up on such a great opportunity? Furthermore, a mountain could not hold 2 tigers. Within the sword sect, having 2 top powers at the same time was not something the sword sect was willing to see. Thus, no matter how one looked at it, the sword sect had no reason to let the Bloodblade Valley go. Hearing Lin Gang's words, He Ying's expression turned ugly. After a moment of silence, he said, "Valley Master, actually, we should leave." "Leave? Where to?" Hearing this, Lin Gang asked. "Leave the sword sect. Right now, we can only avoid them. Rather than staying behind to fight to the death with the sword sect and being destroyed in the end, why not temporarily avoid them and wait for the right time to change?" He Ying said. He Ying was indeed a scheming person. Seeing that the situation was not good, he straightforwardly told Lin Gang to leave. At this point, He Ying paused. Without waiting for Lin Gang to speak, He Ying continued, "Right now, the resources below have basically been gathered. Taking these cultivation resources, our Bloodblade Valley can find a new place and wait for the right time to develop at the same time." When the Green Bamboo sect had been destroyed, He Ying had already ordered Lin Gang to wantonly gather all the cultivation resources within the Bloodblade Valley sphere of influence for the sake of evacuating. In 3 days, the gathering was basically complete. Hearing He Ying's words, Lin Gang fell into deep thought. However, his face quickly lit up as he said, "All right, we will do as brother says. For the time being, we will give way to the sword sect's little sect master. We will leave for now. However, There will be a day when Lin Gang, will definitely return. Lin Gang chose to accept He Ying's suggestion because he had no other choice. After operating in the sword sect for so many years, how could Lin Gang not know the price of evacuating? However, as He Ying had said, the Bloodblade Valley did not have the slightest chance of winning against the sword sect. Knowing that death was the only outcome, if they insisted on fighting, they would only be digging their own graves. Therefore, evacuating the sword sect seemed to be Lin Gang's only choice. Upon hearing Lin Gang's words, He Ying faintly nodded. That day, the Bloodblade Valley began to evacuate. Starships carrying the numerous disciples, attendants, and elders of the Bloodblade Valley rose into the air and flew out of the sword sect. At the same time, the original mountain gate of the Bloodblade Valley was personally destroyed by Lin Gang before they left. At the same time, various cultivation resources and natural treasures were also taken away. Since they were going to evacuate, Lin Gang naturally would not leave anything behind for the sword sect. The sudden evacuation of the Bloodblade Valley was incomparably sudden for the various large subordinate factions. Many people were not even prepared for the Bloodblade Valley to leave the sword sect. Following the departure of the Bloodblade Valley, everyone understood what this meant. It meant that the Bloodblade Valley was afraid of starting a war with the sword sect. At the same time, it also meant that the sword sect was about to return to the era of the sword sect, begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1940. The Bloody Blade Valley's retreat was like a bolt from the blue to the many subordinate factions that had always relied on them. This was because many of these factions had defected from the sword sect to the Bloody Blade Valley. Now, the Bloody Blade Valley had fled, but they were unwilling to leave. It was not hard to imagine what would happen to them next. Many people were in a state of panic. They did not know how the sword sect would treat them or deal with them. At almost the same time, Song Xing, who had been paying attention to the Bloody Blade Valley, also received news of the Bloody Blade Valley's retreat. He immediately reported the matter to Xiao Chun. Song Xing hurriedly rushed to Xiao Chun's courtyard and reported the matter of the Bloody Blade Valley to Xiao Chun. Originally, Song Xing wanted to immediately pursue, but who would have thought that Xiao Chun would smile faintly when he heard the news? There's no need. Xiao Chun did not seem to care about the Bloody Blade Valley's sudden retreat at all. Song Xing asked in confusion, "Why? Aren't we letting the Bloody Blade Valley escape?" Song Xing was too anxious, so he momentarily forgot his attitude. Only when he heard his words and Xiao Chun looked over did Song Xing notice. He immediately bowed respectfully. "Sectmaster, please forgive me. This subordinate was rude earlier." Xiao Chun was the sectmaster of the sword sect, while Song Xing was a subordinate. He should not have questioned Xiao Chun like this. However, Xiao Chun clearly did not intend to make a fuss about it. He smiled faintly and said, "Senior, there's no need for this. There are no outsiders here." Xiao Chun had always respected Song Xing. Thus, when the two of them were together, Xiao Chun had never asked Song Xing to do anything. It was fine as long as he acted casually. After hearing Xiao Chun's words, Song Xing slowly stood up. Then, Xiao Chun said calmly, "Our goal was to drive the Bloodblade Valley out of the Jian province. Now that they have left, isn't it better?" Not only was Xiao Chun not displeased with the Bloody Blade Valley's decision to withdraw from the Jian province, he was even secretly delighted. Why? Because the Bloody Blade Valley had taken the initiative to withdraw. In other words, they had achieved Xiao Chun's goal without sacrificing a single soldier. Just think about it. If the Bloodblade Valley took the initiative to withdraw, then wouldn't the Jian province belong to the sword sect from now on? Had Xiao Chun achieved his goal? Therefore, the evacuation of the Bloody Blade Valley wasn't bad news for Xiao Chun. Song Xing understood Xiao Chun's meaning, but he was still a little worried. But the Bloody Blade Valley will always be a threat if we don't get rid of them. The Bloody Blade Valley was indeed a threat to the sword sect. Moreover, the Bloody Blade Valley had taken the initiative to withdraw this time, most likely to preserve their strength and wait for an opportunity to act in the future. Xiao Chun nodded slightly when he heard this, but he still said calmly, "Senior, the Bloody Blade Valley is indeed a threat, but the most important thing is the strength of our sword sect. In the future, when our sword sect is strong enough, why should we fear the Bloody Blade Valley? When the time comes, destroying the Bloody Blade Valley will be as easy as flipping our hands." Compared to the Bloody Blade Valley, the strength of the sword sect was what Xiao Chun valued the most. Now, Xiao Chun had a way to quickly strengthen the sword sect, and had already discussed it with his three senior brothers, Nangong Guan, Zhou Song, and Wu Huan. Song Xing nodded after Xiao Chun finished speaking. Then, Xiao Chun didn't linger on this issue. He looked at Song Xing and said, "Senior, I'm afraid you'll have to work hard for the next few days. Since the Bloody Blade Valley has retreated, you'll naturally have to take control of their territory as soon as possible. As for the large factions that used to rely on the Bloody Blade Valley, you'll have to give them a beating. In addition, I plan to have the sect masters of the various subordinate factions gather in the sword sect in a month. Therefore, Senior must think of a way to completely take control of everything left behind by the Bloody Blade Valley, including the subordinate factions. When the time comes, have their sect masters come with you to the sword sect." Song Xing didn't hesitate at all when he heard Xiao Chen's words. He immediately nodded and replied, "Yes." Song Xing didn't have any objections to Xiao Chen's order and straightforwardly nodded in agreement. The next day, Xiao Chen returned to the sword sect under the protection of Qian Ling and over 100 disciples of the sword sect. As for Song Xing, Zhao Yu, and Li Sui, the three of them, as well as the other experts of the sword sect, they stayed behind and directly returned to the territory of the Bloody Blade Valley. They began to subdue the subordinate factions of the Bloody Blade Valley. The Bloody Blade Valley had once been able to stand up to the sword sect, so they controlled close to half of the Jian province. Now that the Bloody Blade Valley had voluntarily retreated, the territory that once belonged to the Bloody Blade Valley naturally fell into the hands of the sword sect. As Song Xing and the others entered, the subordinate factions that used to belong to the Bloody Blade Valley all became extremely nervous. There was nothing they could do. Even the Bloody Blade Valley had fled. They didn't believe that they had the strength to contend against the sword sect. They were nervous and apprehensive. As a result, wherever Song Xing and the others went, the local clans or sects would personally come forward to greet them. Moreover, they were all willing to pledge their loyalty to the sword sect. These people were afraid that the sword sect would directly wipe them out, so they were extremely respectful. However, Song Xing naturally wouldn't foolishly believe them. He still had to warn them. With Song Xing overseeing the situation, Xiao Chen wasn't worried about what would happen after the Bloody Blade Valley retreated. 20 days passed in the blink of an eye. The former territory of the Bloody Blade Valley had already been taken over by the sword sect. The entire Jian province had returned to the situation where the sword sect was the only major faction in the past. There were still 10 days until the 1-month period that Xiao Chen had mentioned. The sword sect had already sent out invitations to the various subordinate factions to gather at the sword sect. Naturally, none of the subordinate factions dared to reject the gathering held by the sword sect this time. This time, the sword sect had suddenly moved. Not only did they destroy the Green Bamboo sect, but they even forced the Bloody Blade sect to leave. The sudden change made the subordinate factions understand a principle. No matter how weak the sword sect was, even if they had fallen out of the top 10 Lingtian sects, the sword sect still ruled the entire Jian province. Under Xiao Chen's leadership, the sword sect had truly revealed their fangs this time. With lightning speed, they displayed their absolute strength to the various factions in the Jian province. Unlike their usual attitude, the sword sect's unyielding attitude this time made those who were dishonest no longer dare to have any improper thoughts. After leaving the matters to Song Xing, Yang Song, and the others, Xiao Chen immersed himself in cultivation every day. At the same time, with the help of the various cultivation resources provided by the sword sect, Xiao Chen's cultivation base had also broken through to the initial stage of the Celestial Emperor stage. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1941. Xiao Chun left almost all the matters of the sword sect to Song Xing and Yang Song. However, there was one thing that Xiao Chun needed to do personally. This matter could allow the sword sect's strength to increase by leaps and bounds in a short period of time. In order to make the sword sect stronger, Xiao Chun used all the resources around him. According to Xiao Chun's idea, he wanted Zhou Song and Wu Huan to join the sword sect. Zhou Song founded the Tianju sect. However, the Tianju sect's foundation wasn't strong enough. Therefore, even though it had reached the level of a first-rate force, it was still one of the weakest first-rate forces. In the Tianju sect, other than Zhou Song, the only ones who could be considered worthy were the two Dao Realm vice sect masters. Moreover, Zhou Song didn't have any children. Therefore, it wasn't impossible for him to lead the Tianju sect to join the sword sect. As for Wu Huan, it was even more so. As a rogue cultivator, Wu Huan didn't have the slightest concern. If he wanted Zhou Song and Wu Huan to join the sword sect, the overall strength of the sword sect could indeed increase by leaps and bounds in a short period of time. Of course, this required the consent of the two. As for Nangongwan and Xiao Chun didn't want them to join the sword sect. Xiao was the holy maiden of the Moon Palace. It was impossible for her to join the sword sect. As for Nangongwan, she was the head of the family Nangong. The family Nangong and the Tianju sect were completely different. First of all, the family Nangong had a long history. No one knew how many generations of family Nangong had passed through. Therefore, it was impossible for Nangongwan to give up or lead the family Nangong to join the sword sect. Moreover, the family Nangong was different from the Tianju sect. In the family Nangong, although Nangongwan was the current head of the family, there were many things that she couldn't do alone. In the family Nangong, there were several old monsters. They were all Nangongwan's elders. Therefore, even if Nangongwan agreed, those old monsters in the family Nangong wouldn't. The Tianju sect was different. It was originally founded by Zhou Song. So in the Tianju sect, it could be said that Zhou Song and bounds. 5 people. After 3 rounds of drinking, Xiao Chun finally spoke his mind. He looked at Zhou Song and Wu Huan and said, "Second senior brother, third senior brother, what do you think of the matter that I told you before? You and I will definitely be able to bring the sword sect back to its former glory." He had already mentioned this matter to Zhou Song and Wu Huan. Now that Xiao Chun asked again, Wu Huan didn't hesitate too much and immediately nodded. "I don't have any problems. I'm just one person. I don't have any attachments." Wu Huan didn't have any attachments. Hearing this, Zhou Song, who was beside him, pondered for a moment. Then he said, "I'm fine with it too. But, junior brother, the sword sect has always been the world of sword cultivators. Your third senior brother and I aren't sword cultivators. If we join the sword sect, wouldn't it be a little?" Zhou Song didn't reject joining the sword sect too much. Besides, Xiao Chun also said that even if they joined the sword sect, they would treat the people of the Tianju sect well. For example, Xiao Chun would definitely arrange for the 2 vice sect leaders of the Tianju sect to become the sword sect's head of the sword sect. The only thing that made Zhou Song hesitate was that the sword sect was the world of sword cultivators. Although there were sword cultivators in the Tianju sect, many of them weren't sword cultivators. Would it be a little inappropriate for them to join the sword sect? But in this regard, Xiao Chun smiled. "Second senior brother, I've thought about this. The sword sect has been declining for a long time now. Its future development will naturally need to change." Xiao Chun had naturally thought about this, but now wasn't the right time. According to Xiao Chun, if the sword sect wanted to return to the ranks of the top 10 Lingtian sects, it had to change. He believed that many people were aware of this. Besides, Xiao Chun was now the new sect leader of the sword sect. Naturally, he didn't wish to continue on the same path as the sword sect. Hearing Xiao Chun's words, Zhou Song pondered for a moment, then nodded. "Okay." Zhou Song also nodded in agreement. Regarding this, Xiao Chun was overjoyed. He then toasted with Zhou Song and Wu Huan. With the addition of Zhou Song and Wu Huan, the strength of the sword sect would naturally be greatly improved. There was no doubt about this. Looking at Xiao Chun and the other two, Nangongwan also said with a smile, "Little junior brother, You've been planning this for a long time. Hearing Nangongwan's words, Xiao Chen smiled. Indeed, he had been planning this for a long time. It should be known that Xiao Chen was an extremely ambitious person. Since he had become the sect leader of the Sword Sect, Xiao Chen naturally didn't want the Sword Sect to continue to be decadent. One day, Xiao Chen would bring the Sword Sect to the ranks of the top 10 Lingtian sects, and even become the #1 sect in the Great Thousand World. Moreover, Xiao Chen wouldn't stick to the rules and follow the old path of the Sword Sect. Xiao Chen was very clear about this, and he already had a rough plan in his heart. In Xiao Chen's hands, the Sword Sect would definitely undergo a qualitative change. At that time, it would definitely become one of the most powerful sects in the Great Thousand World. Xiao Chen smiled faintly and didn't say much. Seeing this, Nangongwan smiled and said, "Little junior brother, although I can't join your Sword Sect, I can represent family Nangong and form an alliance with the Sword Sect." Nangongwan could represent family Nangong and form an alliance with the Sword Sect, and Xiao Chen naturally wouldn't refuse. The three of them spared no effort to help Xiao Chen. On the other hand, Xiao Xiao was somewhat powerless in this matter. After all, she wasn't like Nangongwan and the other two, and she couldn't represent the Moon Palace. However, Xiao Chen didn't mind this. Moreover, speaking of which, there would be many opportunities for the Sword Sect and the Moon Palace to interact in the future. As the Moon Palace's holy maiden, Xiao Zhao's help to him wouldn't be any less than Nangongwan and the other two. After agreeing on this matter, the senior and junior brothers naturally drank until they were drunk. The next day, Zhou Song personally rushed back to the Tianju sect to arrange for the merger to join the Sword Sect. Of course, this merger was all about resources. If there were people in the Tianju sect who weren't willing, Zhou Song wouldn't force them. However, there shouldn't be anyone who wasn't willing. After all, joining the Sword Sect was obviously better than staying in the Tianju sect. Compared to ordinary first-rate forces, the Sword Sect had a huge advantage, and that was their foundation that was comparable to the 10 Great Ling Tian sects. This foundation shouldn't be underestimated. A strong foundation represented a good cultivation environment. The stronger a sect's foundation was, the better the treatment its disciples would receive. This was something that most people understood. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1942. Zhou Song and Wu Huan had both agreed to join the Sword Sect. Zhou Song had already left for the Tianjua sect. The next day, Xiao Chen also informed Song Xing, Yang Song, and the others about this matter. Now that the matters in the Bloodblade Valley were basically settled, Song Xing had also brought his men back to the Sword Sect a few days ago. As for the former territory of the Bloodblade Valley, there shouldn't be any problems with leaving Li Sui to guard it. After hearing from Xiao Chen that Zhou Song and Wu Huan had actually joined the Sword Sect, and that Zhou Song would even lead the Tianjua sect's people to join the Sword Sect, Song Xing and the others were stunned at first, but then they were overjoyed. They were all veterans of the Sword Sect. Song Xing and the others naturally hoped to see the Sword Sect become stronger. After all, Song Xing and the others had experienced the Sword Sect's most glorious period. Now that the Sword Sect had fallen to such a state, they naturally felt incomparably aggrieved. And now, Xiao Chen was able to make the Sword Sect's strength soar by leaps and bounds in such a short period of time. Song Xing and the others naturally had no reason to refuse. Song Xing and the others didn't even take Zhou Song's previous worries to heart. Sword cultivator or not, these weren't important to Song Xing and the others at all. As long as the Sword Sect could become stronger again, these things didn't matter. Without any help at all, the matter of Wu Huan and Zhou Song joining the Sword Sect was decided just like that. In the Sword Sect's main hall, as Zhou Song had rushed back to the Tianjua sect, he wasn't present for the time being. On the other hand, Wu Huan and Song Xing were acquainted with each other. Now that Wu Huan had joined the Sword Sect, everyone was naturally closer to each other. After exchanging some pleasantries, Song Xing bowed deeply to Xiao Chen and said, "Subordinate." Song Xing originally wanted to thank Xiao Chen because Xiao Chen didn't go back on his words. When Xiao Chun first became the sect leader of the sword sect, he said that he would lead the sword sect back into the top 10 sects. Now that Zhou Song and Wu Huan had joined the sword sect, Song Xing and the others seemed to see the arrival of this day. Song Xing's was absolutely loyal to the sword sect. No, to be precise, to be exact, Song Xing. However, in the face of Song Xing's gratitude, Xiao Chen helped him up and said with a smile, "Senior, what are you doing?" As the sect leader of the sword sect, Xiao Chun was obviously happy to see the sword sect become stronger. Therefore, Xiao Chun felt ashamed to accept Song Xing's gratitude. The matter was settled smoothly. Next was the arrangement after the Tianjue sect was merged into the sword sect. According to Xiao Chun, Zhou Song and Wu Huan would naturally become the vice sect leaders of the sword sect. Their status would be the same as Song Xing's. As for the two vice sect leaders of the Tianjue sect, who had Dao realm cultivation, they would be the sword leaders. As for the other members of the Tianjue sect, according to Xiao Chun, they would be arranged according to their cultivation. Those who had reached the elder level could become elders. Those who reached the deacon level could become deacons, and so on. Song Xing and the others had no objection to Xiao Chen's arrangement. In the next few days, Xiao Chun cultivated while waiting for the arrival of the Tianjue sect, led by Zhou Song. As for Zhou Song and Wu Huan joining the sword sect, Xiao Chun had not announced it to the public yet. In a few days, the sword sect conference will be held. At that time, the sect leaders of the major forces in the Jian province would come to participate. Xiao Chun planned to announce it to the public at that time. In this way, it would be more intimidating and could make the forces in the Jian province bow their heads. Time passed day by day. There were only 4 days left before the sword sect conference. On this day, Zhou Song finally returned to the sword sect. Accompanying him were the two vice sect leaders of the Tianjue sect. Zhou Song had already arranged the matters of the Tianjue sect. Most people were naturally willing to join the sword sect. There were a small number of people who were unwilling. Zhou Song did not make things difficult for them. After giving them a lot of cultivation resources, he let them leave. Now that the Tianjue sect was preparing to move to the Jian province, Zhou Song led the two vice sect leaders of the Tianjue sect to the sword sect conference. In the main hall of the sword sect, Xiao Chun, accompanied by Wu Huan, Song Xing, and the others, met the two vice sect leaders of the Tianjue sect. One of them was called Dong Hu, and the other was called Yin Ling. They were both Dao realm experts. Obviously, the two of them knew Xiao Chen's identity and agreed to join the sword sect. So when they saw Xiao Chun, the two of them took the initiative to salute him. "Greetings, sect leader." Facing their salutes, Xiao Chen hurriedly helped them up and smiled. "Seniors, there's no need to be so polite." Although Dong Hu and Yin Ling were weaker than Yang Song and the others and were only at the initial Dao realm, they were definitely able to be the sword heads of the sword sect. With the addition of the two of them, the strength of the sword sect instantly doubled. Looking at the upper echelons of the sword sect, there were 3 vice sect leaders who had reached the end realm: Song Xing, Zhou Song, and Wu Huan. There were also 6 sword heads who had reached the Dao realm: Yang Song, Zhao Yu, Qin Ling, Li Sui, and Dong Hu and Yin Ling, who had just joined. It could be said that the current strength of the sword sect was infinitely close to the 10 great Lingtian sects. The only thing they were lacking was a true expert above the Dao realm. Xiao Chen couldn't do anything about this at the moment and could only take things slowly. In order to welcome Dong Hu and Yin Ling, Xiao Chen secretly held a banquet in his cave that day. Nangong Wan, Xiao Xiao, Song Xing, Zhou Song, Xinyuan Ling, Wine Daoist, Long Qing, and Qin Shi all attended. During the banquet, Xiao Chan said to Dong Hu and Yin Ling with some self-blame, "Seniors, I've wronged the two of you today. When it's time for the sword sect meeting, I'll really hold a banquet for the two of you." For the time being, he didn't want to expose this matter. So, he naturally couldn't invite too many people to attend this banquet. Those present were all people around Xiao Chun. In the face of Xiao Chen's opening, Dong Hu and Yin Ling were very grateful. At the same time, the last bit of doubt they had about joining the sword sect quickly disappeared. In just a short month, Shao Chun had forcefully raised the strength of the sword sect to a new level. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the current strength of the sword sect in the Great Thousand World, other than the 10 Great Ling Tian sects, it didn't need to fear any other forces. Even those top-notch first-rate forces would have to think twice before making a move against the sword sect. Perhaps it was because he was happy. Song Xing felt elated at this moment. With the help of alcohol, he unconsciously said, "In this way, our sword sect no longer needs to fear the threat of the Black Emperor sect." When he mentioned the Black Emperor sect, a trace of hatred flashed into Song Xing's eyes. However, other than that, there was also a trace of deep pride. This was because the sword sect did indeed have the strength to not fear the Black Emperor sect. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1943. The Black Emperor sect was a first-rate force, and it was one of the strongest first-rate forces under the 10 Great Ling Tian sects. There are not many of them, only 5 of them. The Black Emperor sect was one of the 5 great first-rate forces, and the most important condition to become a first-rate force was to possess the ability to attack the 10 Great Ling Tian sects. Otherwise, it would be absolutely impossible to become a first-rate force. The Black Emperor sect was the first-rate force closest to the Sword Province, and it was located on the left side of the Overlord Province. It was the well-deserved overlord of the Overlord Province. Moreover, the Black Emperor sect's sphere of influence was not limited to just the Overlord Province. The Black Emperor sect's sphere of influence spanned across 3 provinces, and there were even 3 first-rate forces that were subsidiary sects of the Black Emperor sect that followed the Black Emperor sect's lead. Previously, before Shao Chun became the sect leader of the Sword sect, the Black Emperor sect could be said to be the greatest threat to the Sword sect. Everyone knew that the greatest wish of the 5 great first-rate sects was to enter the ranks of the Ling Tian sects, and the Black Emperor sect was naturally no exception. However, even though they already possessed the ability to attack the Ling Tian sects, there was still a certain gap between the Black Emperor sect and the Ling Tian sects. Although it was not large, it was like a chasm that the Black Emperor sect was unable to cross. It was precisely because of this that the Black Emperor sect naturally locked their gaze onto the Sword sect, because the Sword sect foundation made the Black Emperor sect extremely envious. It was not an exaggeration to say that the Sword sect's foundation was probably even stronger than the Black Emperor sect. Therefore, the Black Emperor sect had always wanted to obtain the Sword sect's foundation, and the Sword sect had always been on guard against this. There were even many times when the Songxing sect had no choice but to humiliate themselves and beg for peace. Every once in a while, they would offer many treasures to the Black Emperor sect in hopes of protecting the Sword sect. However, such a humiliating peace would not last for long. The Black Emperor sect was like a hungry wolf that could not be fed. No matter how many treasures you gave him, he would not be satisfied. There would be a day when the Black Emperor sect would definitely make a move on the Sword sect. If it was in the past, the Sword sect would definitely not care about the Black Emperor sect. But now, following the decline of the Sword sect, the Black Emperor sect was like a sharp jian hanging over the Sword sect. It could take the life of the Sword sect at any time. Upon hearing Songxing mention the Black Emperor sect, Shao Chen's expression changed slightly. He had been in the Great Thousand World for almost a year, so Shao Chun naturally had some understanding of the Black Emperor sect. Furthermore, when he had just assumed the position of sect master, Songxing had already told Shao Chun about the ambitions of the Black Emperor sect. Compared to the Bloodblade Valley, the Black Emperor sect was an existence that the Sword sect should really pay attention to and be careful of. He had always been worried that the Black Emperor sect would suddenly launch an attack, which would be a disaster for the entire Sword sect. But now, with the addition of Zhou Song and Wu Huan, the situation had been reversed. With a great increase in strength, the Sword sect was no longer weaker than the Black Emperor sect. Even if the Black Emperor sect wanted to make a move on the Sword sect would not be afraid at all. The increase in strength allowed Songxing and the other elders to see the hope of the Sword sect's rise. At the same time, The pressure that the Black Emperor sect brought to the Sword sect was also alleviated to the greatest extent at this moment. They didn't dare to say that they could defeat the Black Emperor sect, but at least they had the possibility of contending against the Black Emperor sect. They could be considered to be evenly matched. In this way, the Sword sect had undoubtedly grown from sheep to a fierce tiger. The Black Emperor sect's attitude towards the Sword sect would definitely change from the previous contempt to fear and caution. They would no longer be as easy to manipulate as before. The original situation of a tiger entering a flock of sheep had now become a situation of two tigers fighting each other. This was a change brought about by Shao Chun. Shao Chun didn't have the time to pay attention to the Black Emperor sect for the time being. The most important thing now was to deal with the Sword sect and the internal affairs of the Jin province. He no longer thought about the Black Emperor sect. Perhaps there would be a battle between the Sword sect and the Black Emperor sect in the future, but it was clearly not now. After discussing how to settle the people of the Tianju sect, Shao Chun asked about some matters regarding the Sword sect assembly. This time, Sword sect assembly was also very important to the Sword sect. The decline over the years had caused the Sword sect's control over the Jin province to become weaker and weaker. The purpose of this Sword sect assembly was to rope in, intimidate, and suppress the various major forces in the Jin province and let them clearly know who was the true overlord of the Jin province. Roping in a group, suppressing a group, intimidating a group, this was the main purpose of this Sword sect assembly. Therefore, Shao Chun had been concealing the matter of Zhou Song and Wu Huan joining the Sword sect assembly, because announcing this matter at the Sword sect assembly would obviously have a better effect. In the face of Shao Chun's inquiry, Song Xing told Shao Chun the truth about the Sword sect assembly. After learning that everything went smoothly, Shao Chun nodded slightly and said, "It's been such a long time. Thank you for your hard work during this period of time. Sectmaster, you're too kind. This is what this subordinate should do." Upon hearing this, Song Xing respectfully replied. The matters of the Swords Gate conference proceeded in an orderly manner. As time passed, the headmasters of the various forces in the Jian province arrived at the Swords Gate one after another. Naturally, the Swords Gate had already arranged their accommodations for them. None of the major forces in the Sword sect were absent from the Sword sect assembly this time. Moreover, due to the incident in the Bloodblade Valley, the leaders of these forces were very polite to the disciples of the Sword sect. Even when facing the ordinary disciples of the Sword sect, these leaders restrained their previous contempt. The disciples of the Sword sect could naturally sense the changes in these leaders. For a moment, they seemed to finally feel the pride of being a disciple of the Sword sect. It was also the first time they felt proud to be a disciple of the Sword sect. Looking at these leaders, which one of them didn't have a higher cultivation than them? But so what? As long as they wore the uniform of the Sword sect, these leaders would still be respectful to them and wouldn't dare to overstep their boundaries in the slightest. Over the next few days, the expressions of the disciples of the Sword sect became more and more confident. Even when facing these leaders, they could hold their heads high and face them calmly. Seeing the changes in these disciples, Song Xing, Yang Song, and the others were secretly delighted. In a trance, they seemed to have seen the Sword sect at its peak. Back then, as a disciple of the Sword sect, even when facing the elders of first-rate Sword sect or a deputy sect leader, the disciples of the Sword sect could calmly face them. The reason for this wasn't because they were strong, but because the Sword sect behind them was very powerful. It was so powerful that the elders and deputy sect leaders of the first-rate forces didn't dare to offend them in the slightest. Outside the mountain gate, a group of disciples of the Sword sect stood dignified, welcoming the arrival of the leaders and experts of the various major forces. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1944. I'll remember it in a second. Wonderful, no pop-up window, free reading. It could be said that the Sword sect had undergone earth-shattering changes. If the Sword sect was like a gloomy sunset that made people feel hopeless, then this time, from Tsang Xing and the others to the lowest level of ordinary disciples. Everyone's face was filled with confidence and pride like the rising sun. Although it wasn't glorious, it filled people with hope. The sect masters of the various major forces also deeply understood this point, especially outside the mountain gate. The sect masters stepped onto the sword sect on foot. In the sky, several sword sect elders sat cross-legged, in charge of maintaining order, while the disciples were in charge of registration and settling the sect masters who came. It was a scene of prosperity. For this sword sect assembly, everyone who came was not allowed to fly. They had to step onto the sword sect on foot. If anyone was found flying in the sky, no matter who it was, the sword sect elders would immediately take action and arrest them. Seeing the sect masters step onto the sword sect, the disciples of the sword sect took the initiative to step forward and saluted in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. Please, it was completely different from the sword sect from before. As a result, the sect masters naturally didn't dare to show the slightest disrespect. Everything was proceeding in an orderly manner. In the sword sect, with the arrival of the sect masters, it became increasingly lively. As there were still 2 days before the start of the Swords Gate Conference, the headmasters who had arrived earlier had nothing better to do, so they gathered together and chatted with each other. The changes in the sword sect are really amazing. In a cave, several sect masters sat together. One of them took a sip of wine and lamented. Upon hearing his words, another sect master nodded in agreement. Indeed, although this is a tiger that has fallen to the plains, I wouldn't dare to say that. A tiger is still a tiger, and an overlord is still an overlord. The sword sect was like a tiger that had fallen from grace. But even so, a tiger was still a tiger. This would not change. I wonder what plans the new sect master has for the sword sect's convention. The few of them were silent for a moment before one of the elders said worriedly. Hearing this, the first person to speak laughed and said, "What other plans could they have? They just want us to submit. After all, the Sword Province used to belong to the Sword Sect. If it weren't for the Bloodblade Valley, the Sword Province wouldn't have become like this." That's true. But now that the Bloodblade Valley has fled, the Sword Sect will probably reign supreme in the province once more. The old man nodded. The sect masters had basically guessed the Sword Sect's intentions. This was normal. After all, the Sword Sect's intentions were now very obvious. Besides, Xiao Chun had never thought of hiding these things. Xiao Chun left the trivial matters to his subordinates to handle. As the sect master, what Xiao Chun needed to do was to appear as the new sect master of the Sword Sect when the Sword Sect assembly began. But this time, apart from appearing as the new sect master of the Sword Sect, Xiao Chun had other plans, and that was to introduce Qin Shu and the other 4 ladies. As his wives, Xiao Chun naturally had to formally introduce them to everyone as Xiao Chun's wives. After discussing with Tsang Xing didn't have any objections. After all, Qin Shu and the other 4 ladies were the 5 wives of the Sword Sect. Even Tsang Xing had to respectfully greet them when he saw them. The preparations were left to Tsang Xing while Xiao Chun returned to his cave residence. Qin Shu and the other 4 ladies had already come out of seclusion. Long Qing, Xian Yuan Ling, and the Wine Taoist were still in seclusion. Originally, Xiao Chun also planned to bring Long Qing and Xian Yuan Li to participate in the Sword Sect assembly. Unfortunately, the 2 of them were in seclusion. Xiao Chun couldn't do anything about it. He couldn't interrupt their seclusion because of this matter. After thinking about it, Xiao Chun decided to forget about it. For Long Qing and Xian Yuan Ling, cultivation was the most important thing at the moment. If their cultivation was too low, even if they were Xiao Chun's elder brother and his second sister, Xiao Chun couldn't give them too high of status. Because of this, the people below would be dissatisfied. There was always a difference between the 2 of them and Qin Shu and the other 4 ladies. Even if Qin Shu and the other 4 ladies' cultivation wasn't high enough, their status was already determined based on the fact that they were Xiao Chun's wives. However, Long Qing and Xian Yuan Ling were different. In the cave residence, Xiao Chun, Qin Shu, and the other 4 ladies sat in a pavilion in the garden. Xiao Chun told the 5 ladies about his idea. Hearing this, the five ladies couldn't help but be excited, but at the same time, there was a trace of nervousness. They all looked at Xiao Chun. Tian Yu and Hong Xiao, the two most lively ladies, couldn't help but ask, "Husband, can we really go?" Xiao Chun wanted the five of them to participate in the sword sect assembly with him. The five of them naturally wouldn't refuse. They were even very excited, but at the same time, they were very nervous and even a bit afraid. Xiao Chun smiled. "Of course, you're my wives. It would be against the rules if you didn't participate in something as important as the sword sect assembly," Xiao Chun said with a smile. Hearing this, the five girls smiled sweetly and nodded slightly. Time passed very quickly. 2 days passed very quickly. On the morning of the third day, the sky had just begun to brighten. However, the sword sect was already bustling with activity. This was because today was the day of the sword sect assembly, which was equivalent to Xiao Chen's succession ceremony. One after another, the maids were running back and forth around the main peak of Swords Gate, and on the main square, the pavilions were already completed. They were extremely beautiful, especially the tallest pavilion in the front. It was even more majestic, and from afar, it gave off a sense of majesty. Early in the morning, the elite disciples of the sword sect were all dispatched. The deacons and elders were also extremely busy. Around the main square, the elders and deacons had already led the elite disciples to stand guard. The entire sword sect was extremely busy. At the same time, Xiao Chun, Xiao Qing, and Bai Ruyue had already finished dressing up. Xiao Chen's dressing was much simpler. He only had to comb his hair and put on a set of purple gold robes. However, Qin Shi and the other five ladies were much more troublesome. They hadn't slept the entire night, so the five of them still hadn't finished dressing up. Xiao Chun and Xiao Qing helplessly sat in the courtyard and waited. Bai Ruyue wasn't ready either. Looking at Xiao Chun, Xiao Qing's heart was filled with pride. His greatest pride in life was having Xiao Chun as his son. Looking at Xiao Chun now, he was wearing a purple gold robe. His snow-white hair fluttered in the wind. His calm face gave off a sense of majesty that was difficult to ignore. He indeed had a trace of the majesty of the sword sect master. Chapter 1945. Feeling that Xiao Qing was sizing him up, Xiao Chun said helplessly, "Father, why do you keep looking at me? I want to see what ability I have to give birth to such a son." Xiao Chun was in a good mood and laughed heartily. Xiao Qing was indeed in a good mood. Hearing this, Xiao Chun also smiled and didn't say anything. While the father and son were talking, Bai Ruyue and Qin Shiru's five women also walked out of the room. It was obvious that all the women, including Bai Ruyue, had dressed up meticulously. They were already peerlessly beautiful, and now they were so beautiful that people couldn't take their eyes off them. Striding forward, Xiao Chun arrived in front of Qin Shiru's five women and said with a smile, "My wives are really beautiful." Hearing Xiao Chun's words, the five women all rolled their eyes at Xiao Chun charmingly. Bai Ruyue said with some dissatisfaction, "Brat, what about your mother?" "Beautiful, beautiful. Madam is the most beautiful." Bai Ruyue had just finished speaking, and before Xiao Chun could reply, Xiao Qing said with a smile. Hearing Xiao Qing's words, Bai Ruyue rolled her eyes at him and said, "Go away. You're always so frivolous." Although she was scolding him, the smile on Bai Ruyue's face disappeared. Everyone was preparing to play. At this time, Yang Song also strode into the courtyard and said respectfully to Xiao Chun, "Sect Master, everything is ready." Everything was ready and waiting for Xiao Chun and the others to go. Hearing this, Xiao Chun smiled and nodded. "Thank you for your trouble, Senior." In the main square, there were many elders and disciples of the sword sect in charge of guarding. The specially built pavilions were already filled with the sect masters of the various major forces. At the same time, on both sides of Xiao Chen's pavilion, Song Xing, Zhao Yu, Li Sui, and the others were already in position. However, Zhou Song, Wu Huan, and the others had yet to appear. After all, it was not the right time. Song Xing sat alone in the pavilion on the left side of Xiao Chen's pavilion. There were a total of 3 chairs on the second floor of the pavilion, but the other 2 were empty. On the right side of Xiao Qin's pavilion, Zhao Yu, Li Sui, and Qian Ling sat upright. There were a total of 6 chairs, and there were also 3 empty chairs. As for the empty chairs beside Zhao Yu and the others in the Cangxing, the various sect leaders were naturally puzzled. However, at this time, their attention was more focused on the pavilion that belonged to Xiao Chun. Although the sect master of the sword sect, Xiao Chun, had yet to appear, there were already 2 people sitting on the pavilion. Needless to say, these 2 people were naturally Nangongguan and Xiao Xiao. Some of the sect leaders present recognized Nangongguan and Xiao Xiao. After all, one of them was the head of the family Nangong, and the other was the holy maiden of the Moon Palace. In the Great Thousand World, they could be considered top-notch figures. This was especially true for Xiao Xiao. Her identity as the holy maiden of the Moon Palace made her more dazzling than Nangongguan in certain aspects. Countless pairs of eyes fell on Nangongguan and Xiao Xiao. However, the 2 of them were already used to this and were able to deal with it calmly. They did not have to wait for long. Soon, Xiao Chun and his family, led by Yang Song, appeared at the front of the pavilion, which was also the tallest and largest one. After Xiao Qing and Bai Riyue appeared, they went straight to their seats and sat down. The 2 old men did not have any intention of being in the limelight. Furthermore, if it were not for Xiao Qin's repeated requests, perhaps the 2 old men would not have appeared. On the contrary, Xiao Chun, accompanied by Qin Shu and the 5 women, stood high up on the pavilion's rooftop. Yang Song was a step behind and also stood respectfully. Following the appearance of Xiao Chun, many of the sword sect's elders, deacons, and disciples, including Cangxing, Zhao Yu, and the others who had already sat down, respectfully bowed and greeted them. Greetings, sect leader. Greetings, sect leader's wife. The sword sect's members bowed and greeted them. Seeing this, the sect leaders of the various large factions naturally hurriedly stood up and respectfully greeted. Greetings, sect leader, Madam Sect Leader. Everyone bowed in unison. Xiao Qin's expression was indifferent as he said, "Everyone, please dispense with the formalities." Facing the greetings of so many experts, Xiao Qin's face did not show the slightest trace of nervousness. Although many of the people present had higher cultivations than Xiao Chun still did not show the slightest trace of nervousness. Hearing Xiao Qin's words, everyone slowly straightened their backs and looked at Xiao Chun. The sect leaders of the various large factions were unfamiliar with Xiao Chun. It could be said that this was the first time they had seen Xiao Chun. For a moment, each of the sect leaders had different expressions on their faces. Xiao Chun was indeed too young. Being able to become the sect leader of the sword sect at such a young age made all the sect leaders envious. Even so, no one dared to show the slightest disrespect. In addition to being curious about Xiao Chun, when they saw Qin Shiru and the other 5 women beside Xiao Chun, everyone's expression changed. Beautiful. They were simply too beautiful. Standing beside Xiao Chun, Qin Shiru and the other 5 women were simply as beautiful as fairies. Especially today, the 5 women had specially dressed up, which made them even more beautiful. Many people were incomparably envious of Xiao Chun. Not only did he become the sect leader of the sword sect at such a young age, but he also had 5 such outstanding beauties by his side. This was simply the pinnacle of his life. Status, power, beauty, Xiao Chun could be said to have it all. Most importantly, Xiao Qin's age was the most important. At such a young age, he had already reached a height that ordinary people would not be able to reach in a lifetime or even a few lifetimes. How could they not be envious? All of them looked at Xiao Chun with envy. Compared to Xiao Chun, facing the gazes of the crowd, especially when the cultivation of these people was not low. For example, almost none of the sect leaders' cultivation was below the immortal emperor realm. They were all higher than Qin Shiru and the other 5 women. Therefore, the 5 women could not help but feel a little nervous at this moment. Sensing the nervousness of the 5 women beside him, Xiao Chun smiled and transmitted his voice to the 5 women. "Relax, it's fine." Xiao Chun gestured for the 5 girls to relax. Then, he looked at the leaders of the major sects and the people of the Sword Gate. His voice was amplified by his spiritual power and spread throughout the main square. "Everyone, Junior Xiao Chun is fortunate to have been recognized by the heaven-breaking Sword Sovereign. I was fortunate enough to become the successor of the heaven-breaking Sword Sovereign and succeed the position of sect leader of the Sword Sect. Junior knows that I am young, my cultivation is insufficient, and my experience is insufficient. After succeeding the position of sect leader, it was all thanks to the help of Senior Tsang Xing and the others that I have today. Junior sincerely thanks Senior Tsang Xing for his efforts and support. Of course, I also thank all the sect leaders for their support. Many thanks to everyone." His voice was calm and indifferent. After he finished speaking, Xiao Chun cupped his hands and bowed to everyone present. His attitude was neither servile nor overbearing. There was not a trace of arrogance or inferiority complex. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1946. Xiao Chun said in a tone that was neither servile nor overbearing. As soon as his voice fell, Tsang Xing, who was sitting in the pavilion, immediately bowed respectfully. "Sectmaster, you're being too serious. This subordinate is willing to sacrifice his life for Sectmaster." Although Xiao Chun was thanking Tsang Xing, everyone present was smart. Naturally, no one would accept Xiao Chun's bow with a clear conscience. This was especially so after Tsang Xing took the initiative to speak. Yang Song, the others, and the members of the Sword Sect also bowed respectfully. This subordinate is willing to lay down his life for Sect Master and follow Sect Master to the death. The members of the Sword Sect stood up and replied. Although some of the Sect Masters present had other thoughts, they had no choice but to bow respectfully at this moment. "We are willing to lay down our lives for Sect Master and pledge our lives to follow Sect Master." Xiao Chun naturally couldn't completely believe the words of the Sect Masters. However, Xiao Chun didn't really care if they were loyal to the Sword Sect or not. After all, the purpose of this Sword Sect assembly was to beat some of the major forces. Moreover, the loyalty of the major forces depended more on the strength of the Sword Sect. The stronger the Sword Sect was, the less likely it was for them to rebel. Sometimes, strength could be linked to loyalty. After all, people would die for wealth, and birds would die for food. If the major forces wanted to develop, they would naturally need a strong backer. And the stronger the backer, the more they would naturally pledge their lives to follow. Xiao Chun smiled and said, "All right, with everyone's help, I believe that the Sword Sect will definitely be able to regain its former glory." At this moment, Xiao Chun's arrogance soared to the sky. Although he was only a hypocrite at the Immortal Emperor realm, Xiao Chun seemed to have the aura of a hero in everyone's eyes. His purple gold robe made him look even more majestic and dazzling. As soon as he finished speaking, Xiao Chun took the initiative to raise his wine cup and said to everyone present, "Come, everyone, let's drink this cup." After drinking it in one gulp, Qin Shiru and the others took the initiative to return to their seats. Yang Song had also returned to the pavilion that belonged to the few sword heads. Only Xiao Chun was left standing proudly alone. He swept his gaze across the various sect masters present, and a trace of a smile flashed in his eyes. This was the real highlight of the show. The corners of Xiao Chun's mouth unconsciously curled into a smile. He put down the cup in his hand and slowly said, "Sect Masters, as the sect master of the Sword Sect, I naturally have to take responsibility for the glory of the Sword Sect." Back then, the prestige of the Sword Sect could be said to have enveloped the entire vast 1,000 domains. Now, with the departure of the Sword Venerable, the Sword Sect has gradually fallen. Now, it has fallen from its divine altar and is only a disgrace to our generation. Now that I have received the recognition of the Sword Venerable and have succeeded as the sect master of the Sword Sect, I naturally have to carry on the Sword Venerable's legacy and bring the Sword Sect back to its former glory. Today, taking advantage of this grand event, I would like to announce two things. Second senior brother, third senior brother. As he spoke, Xiao Chen looked at the empty void in front of him and said, following Xiao Chen's words, Zhou Song and Wu Huan appeared out of thin air in front of Xiao Chen and stood in the air. When the two of them appeared, they didn't hide their auras at all. They even deliberately exposed it. Feeling the terrifying auras from Zhou Song and Wu Huan, many of the sect masters present, including the people of the Sword Sect, had a change in expression. Many people couldn't help but say, End Realm experts. It was certain that Zhou Song and Wang Huan were End Realm experts. Sensing the changes in everyone's expression, Xiao Chun smiled and said, perhaps some of you don't recognize the two people in front of you. This is Zhou Song, the sect master of the Tinjua sect. This is Wu Huan. Xiao Chen smiled and introduced the two people. Hearing this, many of the sect masters quickly reacted. Perhaps many of them hadn't seen Zhou Song and Wu Huan before, but most of them had heard of their names, especially Zhou Song. No matter how famous the Tinjua sect was, it could be considered a first-rate sect and had some fame in the vast thousand domains. Their gazes toward Zhou Song and Wu Huan gradually changed. At the same time, the various sect masters were also curious. Why did the two of them appear here? Also, what was Xiao Chen's goal? They were curious, and soon, everyone had an answer. After a pause, the smile on Xiao Chen's face became more and more confident. He looked at everyone and said loudly, Today, Zhou Song and Wu Huan, the two seniors have joined my sword sect. Today, I, as the sect master of the sword sect, confer the two of you as the vice sect masters of the sword sect. Your status and position are the same as Senior Tsang Xing. When Xiao Chun said this, everyone was in an uproar. Not only the various sect masters, but even the people of the sword sect were all dumbfounded. Two End Realm experts joining the sword sect. How was that possible? If that was the case, wouldn't the sword sect have 3 End Realm experts? Wouldn't they be even stronger than before he escaped? They didn't expect that Zhou Song and Wu Huan would actually join the sword sect and become the vice sect masters of the sword sect. Along with Xiao Chen's words, Zhou Song and Wu Huan bowed respectfully to Xiao Chen. Thank you, sect master. In front of so many people, and at such a serious moment, Zhou Song and Wu Huan didn't acknowledge Xiao Chen as their junior brother. Instead, they respectfully called him sect master. Xiao Chen nodded toward the two of them. Then, Zhou Song and Wu Huan sat beside Song Xing looking at the three of them. The various sect masters felt really complicated. 3 vice sect masters. These were 3 End Realm experts. All of a sudden, the sword sect's position in the hearts of the various sect masters rose by a lot. However, this wasn't the end. Just as Zhou Song and Wu Huan sat down, Xiao Chen opened his mouth. Dong Hu, Yin Ling, at the same time, along with Xiao Chen's words, Dong Hu and Yin Ling appeared in front of Xiao Chen. They stood in the air, and their Dao Realm aura surged into the sky. 2 Dao Realm experts? Everyone's expressions changed when they saw Dong Hu and Yin Ling. Even though Dong Hu and Yin Ling were only at the Dao Realm, it was still shocking. At the very least, there were no Dao Realm powerhouses among the various forces present. The strongest among these sect leaders was only at the level of Great Fulfillment Realm, Enlightenment Realm. Suddenly, 2 Dao Realm experts appeared. At this moment, Xiao Chun didn't keep them in suspense and directly said, Senior Dong Hu, Senior Yin Ling, the two of you are the vice sect masters of the Tinjua sect. Now, you have followed Senior Zhou Song and joined my sword sect. Today, as the sect master of the sword sect, I appoint the two of you as the sword head of the sword sect. Dong Hu and Yin Ling joined the sword sect and became the sword heads of the sword sect like Yang Song and the other 3. With that, the original 4 sword heads of the sword sect became the 6 sword heads of the sword sect. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 1947. The addition of Zhou Song, Wu Huan, Dong Hu, and Yin Ling shocked all the sect leaders present. However, this was just the beginning. What shocked them even more was yet to come. After announcing that the four of them had joined the sword sect, Xiao Chen paused. Then, he announced that the Tianjue sect would merge into the sword sect, as well as the alliance between the family Nangong and the sword sect. All of a sudden, along with Xiao Chen's words, everyone knew that the strength of the sword sect had increased tremendously. Compared to before, it was more than twice as strong. 3 End Realm experts and 6 Dao Realm experts. Such top fighting strength could already be ranked among the top powers. Along with Xiao Chen announcing the addition of Zhou Song, Wu Huan, and the others, all of a sudden, the sect leaders present didn't dare to have any second thoughts. What a joke. Before, the sword sect could already dominate the sword state. Now, with so many experts joining the sword sect, the various powers in the sword state didn't dare to have any second thoughts. Before, some of the sect leaders felt that the Bloodblade Valley wouldn't let this matter rest. Now, their thoughts had completely changed. These sect leaders didn't know whether or not the Bloodblade Valley would let this matter rest. However, one day, everyone was certain that if the Bloodblade Valley dared to return to the sword state, there would only be one outcome: destruction. With the current strength of the sword sect, it wouldn't be difficult for them to wipe out the Bloodblade Valley. Looking at the strength of both sides, not to mention other things, just the number of End Realm experts, the Bloodblade Valley only had the Valley Head. Even with the traitor He Ying, there were only 2 of them. On the other hand, the sword sect had 3 End Realm experts. Apart from that, the number of Dao Realm experts in the sword sect completely crushed the Bloodblade Valley. Under such a comparison, the Bloodblade Valley didn't have any chance of going up against the sword sect. There is no doubt that the sword sect would be in charge of everything in Jian province from now on. Even if the Bloody Blade Valley returned one day, it would not change anything. Everyone stared blankly at Xiao Chen on the high platform. Compared to the shock of the sect leaders, the disciples and elders of the sword sect were all extremely excited. As a member of the sword sect, the stronger the sword sect was, the better it would be for them. Who wouldn't want their sect to become stronger? With a faint smile on his face, Xiao Chen looked at the changes in the expressions of the people below. He knew that the goal of this sword sect conference had been achieved. Those sect leaders who weren't honest before probably wouldn't dare to be disloyal after this incident. However, while everyone was in shock and excitement, a spatial crack tore open in the sky all of a sudden. Then, 4 middle-aged men in black dragon robes strode out from it. Everyone was taken aback by the sudden appearance of the 4 middle-aged men. Soon after, someone muttered, "Black Emperor's sect." Judging from their attire, everyone guessed that they were from the Black Emperor's sect. In an instant, everyone's expression changed. Today was the day of the Swords Gate Conference, and the people of the Black Emperor sect had coincidentally appeared at this time. If it was a coincidence, no one would believe it. How could there be such a coincidence in this world? It was obvious that it had been planned long ago. The Black Emperor sect's coveting of the Sword sect wasn't a secret in the Dominator and Sword sect. Many people knew that the Black Emperor sect had always wanted to annex the Sword sect to become one of the top 10 Lingtian sects. In the past, the Black Emperor sect had attacked the Sword sect more than once. In the face of the Black Emperor sect, the Sword sect had always been incomparably sullen. Under everyone's gaze, the leader of the 4 Black Emperor sect powerhouses looked down at Xiao Chen with a disdainful smile and sneered. Why didn't the new sect leader of the Sword sect bow to the emissary of our Black Emperor sect? Although Xiao Chen's succession as the sect leader of the Sword sect wasn't announced to the public, the Black Emperor sect had always been paying attention to the Sword sect. Therefore, this matter wasn't hidden from them. In the eyes of the Black Emperor sect, Xiao Chen was probably just a brat who they didn't need to care about at all. Moreover, the Black Emperor sect had always seen the Sword sect as a piece of fat meat in their mouths. They could eat it whenever they wanted. Therefore, the leader of the Black Emperor sect powerhouse's tone was filled with disdain. He didn't put Xiao Chen in his eyes at all. However, the moment he said this, before Xiao Chen could reply, Song Xing had already coldly shouted, "You're courting death." The leader of the Black Emperor sect powerhouse was Song Xing Yang Song, and the others knew that he was one of the 8 martial marquises of the Black Emperor sect. The Sword sect had 6 sword heads, and the Black Emperor sect had 8 martial marquises. Similar to the Sword sect's sword heads, the 8 martial marquises of the Black Emperor sect were all at the Dao realm. Apart from the 8 martial marquises, the Black Emperor sect also had 4 princes who were all at the End realm. This time, the Black Emperor sect sent a martial marquis to the Sword sect. Their goal was obvious. They just wanted to give the Sword sect and Xiao Chun a show of strength. They wanted to tell Xiao Chun that the Sword sect would belong to the Black Emperor sect sooner or later, which was why this martial marquis of the Black Emperor sect chose to appear at the Sword sect meeting. Facing the arrogance of this martial marquis, a cold intent flashed in Song Xing's eyes. Since Xiao Chun was the sect leader of the Sword sect, he naturally wouldn't allow others to humiliate him. This was why killing intent rose in Song Xing's heart. Facing the cold Song Xing, this martial marquis wasn't nervous at all. Although he was only at the Dao realm, and Song Xing was an End realm expert, so what? Could it be that Song Xing dared to attack him? It wasn't like he hadn't come to the Sword sect before. At that time, be it Song Xing or He Ying, they were all respectful to the Black Emperor sect. Even if they were End realm experts, they didn't dare to offend the Black Emperor sect. Maybe because of all the things that happened before, the Black Emperor sect people instinctively looked down on the Sword sect. In their eyes, no matter what, the Sword sect didn't dare to offend the Black Emperor sect. A cold smile still hung on his face as this martial marquis looked at Song Xing expressionlessly. Why? Deputy sect leader wants to attack me. While speaking, the mocking expression on this martial marquis' face became thicker and thicker. It felt like he was saying, "Do you dare to attack me?" Facing the mocking of this martial marquis, the coldness in Song Xing's eyes became thicker and thicker. The various sect leaders all had different thoughts facing such a situation. However, many of them unknowingly placed their attention on Xiao Chun. As a new sect leader of the Sword sect, everyone wanted to see how Xiao Chun would treat the Black Emperor sect. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1948. Xiao Chun was the new sect master of the Sword sect. Everyone present wanted to see what kind of attitude Xiao Chun would have when facing the Black Emperor sect. Would he still be as accommodating as before, or would he be forceful? Everyone's gazes involuntarily turned toward Xiao Chun. At the same time, Song Xing, Yang Song, and the other higher-ups of the Sword sect also turned their gazes toward Xiao Chun, waiting for Xiao Chun's decision. Facing the gazes of the crowd, the smile on Xiao Chun's face gradually became cold and stern. Raising his head to look at the 4 people from the Black Emperor sect in the sky, Xiao Chun said indifferently, "They're really standing so high. Who can bring the 4 of them down for me?" It was a baffling sentence. Hearing this, many of the sect leaders present were still unable to react. For a moment, they did not know what Xiao Chun meant. However, at this moment, Song Xing, Yang Song, Donghu, and Qianling had already stood up and respectfully bowed to Xiao Chun. Yes. With that, the 4 of them took a step forward and instantly appeared in front of the 4 people from the Black Emperor sect. After that, Song Xing took the lead and extended his hand toward the Black Emperor sect's martial marquis as he coldly said, "Go down." Without any hesitation, he chose to attack. Seeing this, the martial marquis of the Black Emperor sect was stunned at first. Then he looked at Song Xing with an angry face and shouted, "Song Xing, are you crazy? You dare to attack me? Once I step into the Black Emperor sect, I will definitely flatten your Sword sect." He never thought that Song Xing would actually dare to attack him. Before this, when the envoys of the Black Emperor sect came to the Sword sect was not respectful. Not to mention attacking. They did not even dare to offend them. However, this time, the Sword sect changed their usual attitude and did not give the Black Emperor sect any face. Even after hearing the words of the martial marquis, that Song Xing did not have the slightest intention of holding back. He sent out a palm strike and fiercely suppressed the martial marquis. Faced with the attack of Song Xing's group, the 4 people from the Black Emperor sect would naturally not allow themselves to be captured without putting up a fight. Under the lead of this Wu Ho, they immediately prepared to counterattack. However, the difference in strength between the two sides was too great. In fact, there was no objection to this kind of resistance. A cold glint flashed across Xiao Qin's eyes as he looked at the four people in the sky, whose fate was unknown. He laughed coldly in his heart. These four people thought that they were from the Black Emperor's sect and appeared in the Sword sect so arrogantly. Moreover, the person leading them was only a martial marquis from the Black Emperor's sect, a Dao realm expert. When facing him, he did not show the slightest bit of respect. Since that was the case, with Xiao Qin's character, he would naturally not give the four of them any face. As for offending the Black Emperor's sect, Xiao Qin was not afraid of that at all. Originally, after learning about the matter of the Black Emperor's sect, Xiao Qin had already made a decision. In Xiao Qin's opinion, the compromise from before would not be able to save the Sword sect. The ambition of the Black Emperor's sect was as clear as day. Blindly giving in would only make them want a yard after taking an inch. Only by being tough and making the Black Emperor's sect fearful would he be able to protect the Sword sect. Therefore, there was no need to doubt Xiao Qin's attitude towards the Black Emperor's sect. If they wanted to fight, they would fight. From today onwards, the Sword sect would not give in. Coldly looking at the great battle in the sky, the space where the 8 people were fighting had already been sealed by Songxing. Therefore, the aftermath of the battle would not affect the people present. The 4 people from the Black Emperor's sect resisted with all their might. However, such resistance could only last for the time it took to brew a cup of tea. After that, the 4 of them were taken down by Songxing and the others. A palm struck the abdomen of the Black Emperor's sect's martial marquis, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood. Under this palm, the martial marquis had already been seriously injured by Songxing. Obviously, he was not a match for Songxing. There was a huge gap between the two of them. With Songxing's strength, he could be compared to the 4 great princes of the Black Emperor's sect. After heavily injuring him with a palm strike, Songxing did not stop and directly sealed the martial marquis's cultivation. Seeing this, the martial marquis furiously roared. "Songxing, you dare! Noisy, why wouldn't I dare? A mere martial marquis. Do you think you are one of the 4 great princes? Get down!" Hearing the martial marquis's furious roar, Songxing coldly replied, following which, with a kick, he immediately kicked the martial marquis down. The leading martial marquis was directly taken down by Songxing. As for the other 3, they were not a match for Yang Song and the others. They had long been taken down by the sealed cultivation. The 4 of them were blasted down from the sky by Songxing. Just as they landed on the ground, a disciple of the Sword sect came forward and controlled the 4 of them. Without any explanation, the 4 of them were escorted in front of Xiao Qin. "Kneel." After escorting the 4 of them to the pavilion where Xiao Qin was, a disciple fiercely kicked the leg of the Black Emperor's sect's martial marquis. Immediately, the Black Emperor's sect's martial marquis directly knelt down. Looking down at the 4 people of the Black Emperor's sect from above, Xiao Qin's face revealed a somewhat evil smile. At the same time, the martial marquis of the Black Emperor's sect also furiously raised his head to look at Xiao Qin and coldly roared, "Your Sword sect is courting death. Let me go, otherwise in the future, my Black Emperor sect will definitely flatten your Sword sect." You don't know what you're talking about. Things had already reached such a stage, and this martial marquis of the Black Emperor sect actually dared to threaten him. Xiao Qin coldly said. Just as Xiao Qin's voice rang out, a disciple immediately gave him a slap and coldly roared, "Impudent." As one of the 8 martial marquises of the Black Emperor sect, he was actually slapped by a disciple of the Sword sect. Moreover, it was a slap to the face. There was a thick sense of humiliation in his heart. However, because his cultivation was sealed, even if he was sullen in his heart, he did not have the slightest ability to resist. Songxing and the other 3 had already returned to their seats and respectfully bowed toward Xiao Qin. Towards this, Xiao Qin also faintly nodded his head. After the 4 of them sat down, Xiao Qin opened his mouth and spoke to the 4 people of the Black Emperor's sect. "I know about the ambitions of your Black Emperor's sect, but today I can clearly tell you that from today onwards, my sword sect will no longer be courteous to your Black Emperor sect. If your Black Emperor sect wants to fight, then fight. My sword sect will accompany you at any time." Changing from his previous compromising attitude, Xiao Qin's attitude towards the Black Emperor sect was already incomparably clear. If they wanted to fight, then fight. This was Xiao Qin's attitude towards the Black Emperor sect. They had been waiting for Xiao Qin's attitude. At this moment, when they heard these words, many of the sect heads present were stunned and could not help but think in their hearts, "This new sect master's attitude is really unyielding. This is almost equivalent to declaring war on the Black Emperor sect." Indeed, Xiao Qin's words could already be understood as a declaration of war on the Black Emperor sect. The Sword sect, which had previously compromised to the Black Emperor sect, had a 180-degree change in attitude after Xiao Qin came in power. They had become incomparably unyielding and were not afraid of the Black Emperor sect's deterrence in the slightest. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1949. If he wanted to fight, he would fight. That was Xiao Qin's answer. The martial marquis from the Black Emperor sect was stunned for a moment before he shouted angrily, "Are you crazy? Do you know the consequences of declaring war on my Black Emperor sect?" He never thought that Xiao Qin would be so unyielding. The Sword sect definitely wouldn't have dared to act like this when facing the Black Emperor sect. Even though the Sword sect was ranked among the top 10 heaven-ascending sects, that was in the past. The current Sword sect couldn't be compared to the Black Emperor sect at all. The Black Emperor sect was one of the top 5 super first-rate forces in the Great Thousand World. They had 3 first-rate forces like the Sword sect under them. Yet, the Sword sect actually dared to declare war on the Black Emperor sect. Crazy. In the eyes of the Black Emperor sect's martial marquis, Xiao Qin was definitely crazy. Or rather, he didn't know what was good for him. However, Xiao Qin didn't seem to care about the martial marquis's angry shout. This person obviously didn't know that the Sword sect was no longer the same as before. Previously, when Zhou Song, Wu Huan, and the others joined the Sword sect, this martial marquis hadn't arrived yet, so he naturally didn't know what had happened before. Moreover, he clearly didn't expect that in such a short period of time, the Sword sect had undergone such earth-shattering changes. Its strength had more than doubled compared to before. With the current Sword sect strength, even if it couldn't compare to the Black Emperor sect, it was definitely not in existence without the ability to retaliate. Even if the Black Emperor sect could destroy the Sword sect, the consequences were probably not something the Black Emperor sect could bear. With the current strength of the Sword sect and the Black Emperor sect, if the Black Emperor sect wanted to destroy the Sword sect, they had to be prepared to suffer heavy losses. To put it bluntly, both sides would suffer heavy losses. The Sword sect would be destroyed, but the Black Emperor sect would definitely be crippled. It was even possible that they would fall from being a super first-rate force. In the past, the Sword sect was a piece of fatty meat that could be eaten at any time in the eyes of the Black Emperor sect. But now, this piece of fatty meat had become a stubborn rock. Perhaps the Black Emperor sect could still eat it, but they would definitely lose a mouthful of teeth. Ignoring the Marquis's angry shout, Xiao Qin looked down on him and said indifferently, "Since you said it's a declaration of war, then so be it. But since that's the case, kill. Kill." Hearing Xiao Qin's words, the Black Emperor sect's martial marquis was immediately stunned. Xiao Qin wanted to kill him? The marquis was stunned at first, thinking that he had misheard. But when he saw the Sword sect elder beside him unsheathing his sword, he realized that he hadn't misheard. And Xiao Qin wasn't joking with him. "Xiao Qin wants to kill me, this. I never thought that I would one day fall in the Sword's gate." The martial marquis regained his senses, and a flash of fear flashed across his eyes. He then lifted his head and shouted at Xiao Qin, who was on top of the pavilion. "You can't kill me. If you kill me, the Black Emperor sect won't let you go. Do you really want to fight to the death with the Black Emperor sect? Bastard, you." At death's door, the Marquis still wanted to use the Black Emperor sect to threaten Xiao Qin. Unfortunately, before he could finish, The elder beside him had already slashed down with his sword. His voice came to an abrupt halt. At the same time, a bloody head flew into the air. When this martial marquis was killed, the other 3 disciples of the Black Emperor sect were naturally not spared. They were directly killed in front of everyone present. The powerhouse of the Black Emperor sect had come with an aggressive aura, but he was killed right in front of everyone's eyes. As the 4 bloody heads flew into the air, everyone present was stunned. At the same time, there was a hint of fear and horror in their eyes when they looked at Xiao Chun. In the beginning, these sect leaders only treated Xiao Chun as a lucky brat. But today, after witnessing Xiao Chun's ruthless means, perhaps no one dared to think so anymore. Although Xiao Chun was young, his courage was boundless. He even dared to kill a marquis of the Black Emperor sect. Who wouldn't shout, "Chun dare not kill"? Now that the Swords Gate was under Xiao Chun's control, it was completely different from before. It was no longer the decadent Swords Gate of the past. Instead, it had become firm and domineering, like an unsheathed sword. Wherever it went, no one would be able to avoid its sharp edge. The horror in his eyes didn't dissipate for a long time. At the same time, everyone present knew that Xiao Chun had killed the marquis of the Black Emperor sect. That naturally meant that there would be a battle between the Sword sect and the Black Emperor sect, and it was likely that it would erupt soon. A martial marquis had been killed. With the overbearing style of the Black Emperor sect, they would definitely not let the matter rest. As for the Sword School, from the looks of it, they would probably not give in either. As such, there was only one battle left. However, facing this battle between the 2 sects, the sect leaders present were not confident. If it was before, everyone would probably think that the Sword sect would lose without hesitation. But now the Sword sect could no longer be mentioned in the same breath. With the addition of Zhou Song, Wu Huan, and the others, as well as the alliance of the family Nangong, the strength of the Sword sect had increased greatly. Under such circumstances, the Black Emperor sect would definitely be afraid, so it was hard to say who would win or lose. Not paying attention to the expressions of the sect leaders, Xiao Chun waved his hand, and the disciples of the Sword sect carried the corpses of the 4 people from the Black Emperor sect away, leaving only a trail of blood that was still eye-catching. After dealing with the corpses of the 4 people from the Black Emperor sect, a smile appeared on Xiao Chun's face once again. It was as if nothing had happened just now. Xiao Chun said with a chuckle as he swept his gaze across the sect leaders present. "Everyone, there's no need to take that little episode to heart. Let's get back to business. I've already said the reason why we're holding the Sword sect assembly today. What I want to say is that since we're all native forces of the Jian province, we're naturally bound together for good or ill. It can be said that we're all sitting on the same boat, so we should be united." At this point, Xiao Chun paused for a moment before continuing. "Therefore, as the overlord of the Sword sect is duty-bound for the development of the Jian province. Thus, I've decided to recruit the elite disciples of your families or sections. Each of your families will have a spot to let the younger generation of your family join the Sword sect to cultivate. Of course, this person will naturally pass the test of the Sword sect. In a few days, the Sword sect will select the most talented people to join the Sword sect." Xiao Chun's words were very casual, but hearing this, the expressions of all the sect leaders present changed greatly, and a strong sense of resistance flashed through their eyes. Taking in the changes in everyone's expressions, Xiao Chun smiled and took the initiative to raise his cup. "Come, everyone, let's drink another cup. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 1950. He did not care whether the sect leaders agreed or not. As soon as he finished speaking, Xiao Chun raised his cup and drained it in one gulp. Then, his gaze landed on the various sect leaders. Facing Xiao Chun's gaze, to be honest, the various sect leaders did not want to drink this cup of wine at all. This was because they knew the meaning behind Xiao Chun's words. What was it about selecting elite disciples to enter the Sword sect? It seemed like an opportunity, but in reality, it was to send people to the Sword sect as hostages. Furthermore, Xiao Chun had just said that this time, it was not the sect leaders who sent people over, but the people from the sword sect who personally came to pick them. As a result, there was no chance of them passing off as fake pearls. Thinking about it, if the people from the sword sect personally came to pick them, then there was no doubt that they would definitely choose those with sufficient qualifications. Once these people were selected to enter the sword sect, they might be able to obtain better treatment. But on the other hand, if anyone had any ill intentions, then these people would definitely be the first to die and would become hostages. Xiao Chun was openly asking for hostages from the various sect leaders present. His goal was to better control the Jian province, and regarding this, the various sect leaders had no way to refuse. Perhaps before today, some of these sect leaders might have refused, but now, after seeing Xiao Chun kill the Black Emperor sect's Wu Ho with their own eyes, no one dared to object. Even the Black Emperor sect's Wu Ho dared to kill them. The sect leaders did not think that Xiao Chun would not dare to kill them. And from Xiao Chun's previous actions, if anyone dared to object, they would definitely die on the spot, without a doubt. Even though they did not dare to do so in their hearts, the sect leaders still had no choice but to drink this cup of wine. The originally mellow and rich wine. However, at this moment, when the sect leaders drank it, it was extremely bitter. Seeing that all the sect leaders had finished their drinks, Xiao Chun smiled and said, "Ha, good. I understand your intentions. You can rest assured that when these elites enter my sword sect, I will do my best to nurture them. In the future, they will definitely become the perfect successors of your forces." As soon as Xiao Chun said this, the faces of the sect leaders turned even uglier. A bitter smile appeared on their faces. It seemed that they had underestimated Xiao Chun. He had thought that Xiao Chun had only allowed these people to enter the sword sect as hostages. But now it seemed that things weren't that simple. Xiao Chun's actions did indeed have the intention of letting these people enter the sword sect as hostages, but this was definitely not the most important thing. Xiao Chun's true goal was to completely control the sword province in the future and completely forge the sword province into an iron plate. Thinking about it, it was no exaggeration to say that these people that Xiao Chun had chosen this time were absolutely the true core disciples of the various forces in the sword province. They might be the legitimate sons of the various sect leaders, or they might be the personal disciples of the various sect leaders, and so on. These people were the closest to the sect leaders present. Once they entered the sword sect and lived in the sword sect for a long time, Xiao Chun would have plenty of time to instill their loyalty to the sword sect and subtly influence them. In this way, when they grew up in such an environment, their loyalty to the sword sect would definitely reach an unimaginable level. At that time, when these people had cultivated successfully with their original status in their respective forces and the support of the sword sect, it wasn't impossible for them to return to their respective forces and become the new sect leaders. Once these people became the sect leaders of the various forces in the sword province, it was conceivable that the entire sword province would be completely under Xiao Chun's and the sword sect's control. There would be no need to worry about anyone betraying the sword sect at all. Xiao Chun's plan was indeed very far-fetched, because it would take at least 100 years for these people to grow up. It was a very long time, but from another perspective, this was also a way to get things done once and for all. As long as these people grew up, Xiao Chun would no longer have to worry about the internal problems of the sword province, nor would he have to worry about the various forces in the sword province having ulterior motives. After guessing Xiao Chun's true intention, not only the sect leaders, but even Song Xing and the others also felt admiration for Xiao Chun. To be able to see so far at such a young age was truly something that ordinary people couldn't do. With a faint smile hanging on the corner of his mouth, Xiao Chun didn't care about what the people present thought. In any case, the matter had already been decided. It was too late to regret it now. After taking their seats, the next part of the banquet was meaningless. However, what needed to be taught had already been taught. Next, Xiao Chun also gave some rewards to the sect leaders present. It wasn't expensive, but it wasn't cheap either. The strategy of using the carrot as a stick finally allowed Xiao Chun to take control of the situation in the sword province. Looking at the expressions of these sect leaders, Xiao Chun believed that as long as the sword sect didn't fall, they definitely wouldn't dare to do anything unnecessary. This made Xiao Chun secretly relieved. The atmosphere of the banquet wasn't very high. At least, when Xiao Chun was present, the sect leaders seemed a little uneasy. Xiao Chun naturally felt this. Therefore, halfway through the banquet, Xiao Chun left with Qin Shu and the 5 girls, as well as his parents. With a different status, many things were naturally different from before. For example, if Xiao Chun was present, the sect leaders would definitely not be able to drink to their heart's content. After Xiao Chun left, the atmosphere in the banquet hall clearly became lively. After returning to his cave residence, Xiao Chun sighed softly. The position of sect leader seems to be limitless, but it's also very lonely. With a high position, it was destined that there would be fewer and fewer people around him. Even if it was Cang Xing, Yang Song, and the others, Xiao Chun knew that it was impossible for them to become friends. This was because there were some things that Cang Xing and the others couldn't say to Xiao Chun, and they also didn't dare to say to Xiao Chun. There are fewer and fewer people I can confide in, Xiao Chun lamented. However, there was nothing he could do about it. Every hero was like that. Because of their noble status, it was natural that people would fear them. And with fear, the distance between them would naturally be pulled apart. After sighing softly, Xiao Chun didn't think too much about it. After chatting with Qin Shu and the other girls for a while, he directly went to cultivate. As for the banquet, Xiao Chun didn't need to worry too much about it. Only Yang Song and the others would handle it. Xiao Chun's current priority was still to improve his own cultivation. While Xiao Chun was cultivating in a cave residence in the Black Emperor sect far away in Bazhou. This cave residence belonged to Tiger King Zhao Chanfeng, one of the 4 great princes of the Black Emperor sect. At this moment, Zhao Chanfeng was originally cultivating when an elder suddenly rushed in. He looked at Zhao Chanfeng and said nervously, "Your Majesty, something has happened. Marquis Jinbo is dead." Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1951. I'll remember it in a second. Wonderful, no pop-up window, free read. Following the elder's words, Zhao Chanfeng, who was originally cultivating with his eyes closed, slowly opened his eyes. 2 rays of light flashed through his eyes as he coldly said, "Marquis Jinbo is dead?" Marquis Jinbo was the marquis who went to the sword sect. Zhao Chunfeng knew that Marquis Jinbo was going to the sword sect because he was the one who sent Marquis Jinbo. The sword sect suddenly had a new sect master, and it was actually a junior. Zhao Chunfeng naturally had to send people to take a look. In addition, Xiao Chan was holding a sword sect assembly this time, so he couldn't ignore it. Originally, he had the idea of going to the sword sect to intimidate them, but who knew that Marquis Jinbo was actually dead. 2 rays of cold light flashed through Zhao Chunfeng's eyes. Facing Zhao Chunfeng's gaze, the elder respectfully lowered his head and told Zhao Chunfeng about Marquis Jinbo's life tablet shattering. With the life tablet shattered, Marquis Jinbo was definitely dead. Although he didn't know the specifics, Zhao Chunfeng was 80% sure that Marquis Jinbo was killed by the sword sect. Because in the entire Jian province, other than the sword sect, there was no other force that had the ability or the courage to kill Marquis Jinbo. Hearing the elder's words, Zhao Chunfeng was silent for a moment, then coldly said, "Investigate." Zhao Chunfeng had to investigate what exactly happened after Marquis Jinbo went to the sword sect. Hearing Zhao Chunfeng's words, the elder respectfully replied, "Yes." The elder respectfully replied, then retreated. Zhao Chunfeng's gaze looked in the direction of the sword sect, and the killing intent in his eyes slowly gathered. The Black Emperor sect already knew about Marquis Jinbo's death. Regarding this, there was nothing to be surprised about. When Marquis Jinbo was killed, Xiao Chen already knew that this matter couldn't be hidden. After all, as one of the 8 great martial marquis of the Black Emperor sect, the Marquis of Jinbo definitely had a life tablet in the Black Emperor sect. Once his life tablet shattered, the Black Emperor sect would naturally know of his death. Several days had passed in the sword sect, and the various sect leaders had left one after another. At the same time, Xiao Chun had also arranged for the sword sect elders to head to the various factions to select the core juniors to join the sword sect. In the face of the sword sect's actions, although the sect masters of the various major powers were unwilling, no one dared to stop them. Everything was going according to Xiao Chen's plan. Inside the sword sect, under the management of Song Xing and Yang Song, things were slowly stabilizing. On this day, Xiao Chen was cultivating as usual. However, Song Xing rushed in and bowed respectfully to Xiao Chen. "Sect Master, something has happened." Hearing Song Xing's words, Xiao Chen slowly opened his eyes and asked, "What's wrong?" "The Black Emperor's sect has declared war." Hearing this, Song Xing didn't waste any time and directly replied. After a few days, the Black Emperor sect had clearly investigated the matter of the Marquis of Jinbo. This was not a secret in the first place. After all, when Xiao Chen killed the Marquis of Jinbo's group of 4, it was in front of many sect leaders. Therefore, the Black Emperor sect only needed to casually investigate to find out the truth. After finding out that the Marquis of Jinbo had indeed died at the hands of the sword sect, with the tyrannical nature of the Black Emperor sect, they naturally wouldn't let this matter rest. Therefore, just now, the Black Emperor sect used this as an excuse to declare war on the sword sect. What come would come. Hearing Song Xing's words, Xiao Chen's expression didn't change much. The Black Emperor sect declaring war was something that was expected. Taking a deep breath, Xiao Chen said indifferently, "It's something that's expected. Tell everyone to gather at the Great Hall. Sooner or later, there would be a battle with the Black Emperor sect." This was unavoidable. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Song Xing also nodded and respectfully left the courtyard. Not long after, Xiao Chen, Song Xing, Zhou Song, Wu Huan, Yang Song, and the other upper echelons of the sword sect gathered together in the main hall. Everyone already knew about the Black Emperor sect's declaration of war. Sitting on the main seat, Xiao Chen looked at everyone present and slowly said, "The Black Emperor sect has declared war. What should our sword sect do?" Xiao Chen asked. Actually, there was no need to choose. They had to accept the challenge. It was impossible for them to ask for peace, and the Black Emperor sect would not give the sword sect the chance to do so. They had always wanted to take the sword sect for themselves. Now that they had such an excuse, the Black Emperor sect would definitely not stop. Therefore, it was impossible for them to ask for peace. They had to accept the challenge. No one had any objections to this. Hearing everyone's answer, Xiao Chen continued, "Since that's the case, let's accept the challenge. However, the Black Emperor sect is fierce and not easy to deal with. I feel that our goal in this battle is not to defeat the Black Emperor sect, but to let them know the difficulties and retreat. Defeating the Black Emperor sect was still unrealistic with the current strength of the sword sect. Xiao Chen's goal was only to let the Black Emperor sect know the difficulties and retreat. As long as the Black Emperor sect understood one thing, the sword sect was not something that they could eat as they wished. If they wanted to eat the sword sect, the Black Emperor sect would have to be prepared to suffer a great loss. With that, the Black Emperor sect would be fearful and not dare to casually attack the sword sect. Song Xing and the others supported Xiao Chen's idea and didn't object at all. After all, everyone knew how strong the sword sect was. They didn't need to defeat the Black Emperor sect in this battle. They just needed to let them know the difficulties and retreat. Along with Xiao Chen's words, Zhou Song opened his mouth. However, with just our sword sect, it would be hard to block them. We need to contact Senior Brother for help. The Black Emperor sect had 4 princes who were all end realm experts. As for the sword sect, only Song Xing, Zhou Song, and Wu Huan were end realm experts. The Black Emperor sect also had a sect leader who was end realm. This meant that the Black Emperor sect had a total of 5 end realm experts, while the sword sect only had 3. With that, they did indeed need to ask for Nangongwan's help. Hearing Zhou Song's words, Xiao Chun nodded his head. I'll contact Senior Brother right away." After the sword sect meeting ended, Zhou Song and Wu Huan remained in the sword sect, while Nangongwan and Xiao Xiao returned to family Nangong and Moon Palace respectively. The Black Emperor sect was about to launch a large-scale attack, so they needed family Nangong's help. With that said, Xiao Chun immediately sent a message to Nangong Wan. Not long later, Nangong Wan replied and told Xiao Chun that she would lead people to Jianzhou as soon as possible. With Nangong Wan's help, although the Sword Sect was still at a disadvantage when facing the Black Emperor sect, they would at least have the strength to fight. After receiving Nangong Wan's reply, Xiao Chun looked at Song Xing and the others and said in a low voice, "Quickly prepare. We can't avoid this battle. There will definitely be a battle with the Black Emperor sect. We can use this chance to let the people of the world know that our sword sect isn't a soft persimmon that anyone can bully." Chapter 1952. No matter if it was Xiao Chun, Song Xing, Yang Song, and the others, they all knew that this battle with the Black Emperor sect was unavoidable. If the Sword Sect wanted to survive, they had to fight with the Black Emperor sect. This was because only by fighting could the Sword Sect make the Black Emperor sect fear them. Otherwise, if the Black Emperor sect kept thinking about the Sword Sect wouldn't be able to develop at all. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Song Xing and the others nodded in agreement. Then, they left the main hall one after another. That day, the Sword Sect accepted the challenge in a high-profile manner. Moreover, many experts of the Sword Sect had already started to rush to the border between the Sword and Bazhou. It seemed like they were going to fight to the death with the Black Emperor sect. Within the cave, as the sect leader of the Sword Sect, Xiao Chun naturally had to rush to Bazhou. Before he left, Qin Shiru and the others were naturally extremely worried. After all, Xiao Chen's cultivation was only at the small success stage of the Immortal Emperor realm. In such a large-scale battle, Xiao Chen's cultivation was too low. Compared to Song Xing and other End Realm experts, Xiao Chen didn't have any ability to protect himself. Even the aftershock of a single attack was something Xiao Chun probably couldn't block. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that with Xiao Chen's current cultivation, he wouldn't be of much use in this battle. However, he had no choice. As the sect leader of the Sword Sect, Xiao Chun had to go. "Husband, you have to be careful." Although they were extremely worried, Qin Shiru and the others knew that they couldn't persuade Xiao Chun at all. Facing the advice of the 5 women, Xiao Chun smiled and nodded. "Don't worry, I won't do anything. I know my own strength." Xiao Chun did not plan to personally participate in the battle. After all, his cultivation was too low, so participating in the battle was useless. It was even very likely that he would be targeted by the people of the Black Emperor sect. At that time, any elder with a comprehension realm cultivation would be enough to make Xiao Chun suffer. Xiao Chun didn't intend to personally take action. The most important thing in this battle was still Song Xing and the others. Furthermore, Xiao Chen's participation was more of a representation of his attitude. After all, Xiao Chun was the sect leader of the Sword Sect. Upon hearing Xiao Chen's words, Qin Shiru and the other girls nodded slightly. After that, Xiao Chun bid farewell to his parents and left the Sword Sect with Song Xing and the others. Facing the Black Emperor sect, Xiao Chun didn't dare to underestimate them. After all, the strength of the Black Emperor sect was there for all to see. This was why this time, the Sword Sect had sent out all their elites. Pretty much all of their experts had rushed to the Bazhou border to await the arrival of the Black Emperor sect. Just as the Sword Sect was preparing to fight, within the main hall of the Black Emperor sect, the higher-ups of the Black Emperor sect were gathered together. On the main seat, a muscular middle-aged man sat. This person was the sect leader of the Black Emperor sect, He Sui. As the sect leader of a top sect, He Sui's cultivation had reached the peak of the End Realm. One could say that he was not far from breaking through to the End Realm. He was really strong. At this moment, sitting on the main seat, He Sui's face didn't show any signs of nervousness. Compared to the Sword Sect, He Sui and the higher-ups of the Black Emperor sect were much more relaxed. Looking at the people below, He Sui smiled and said, "The Sword Sect, let's take them down this time." His tone was really calm and relaxed. It was as if to He Sui, taking down the Sword Sect was just a simple matter. Hearing He Sui's words, the higher-ups of the Black Emperor's sect all laughed coldly. That's right, we must take down the Sword Sect this time. The Black Emperor's sect had been eyeing the Sword Sect for a long time. This time, they would make use of this chance to take down the Sword Sect. At that time, the Black Emperor's sect would have a chance to become one of the top 10 Lingtian sects. Of course, to become one of the top 10 Lingtian sects, the key was that Sui had to break through to the End Realm. To break through to the End Realm naturally wasn't a simple matter. If not, Sui wouldn't have been stuck at the peak of the End Realm for so many years. However, if he could take down the Sword Sect, Sui would have the confidence to break through. This was because the Sword Sect had a treasure that could help one break through to the End Realm. This was also the treasure that Sui wanted the most. One could even say that the reason why Sui couldn't forget about the Sword Sect was because of this treasure. Obtaining this treasure meant that Sui had a chance to break through. At that time, the Black Emperor's sect could start to charge into the ranks of the top 10 Lingtian sects. A cold intent flashed across his eyes as Sui said calmly, "A little kid can become the head of a sect. What a joke. Send my orders to enter the Sword Continent. This time, I will make the final decision and take down the Sword Sect." Hearing Sui's words, Zhao Chunfeng and the other higher-ups all stood up and replied respectfully yes. Along with Sui's orders, the experts of the Black Emperor sect started to rush towards the Sword Continent. With the current situation, the two sides would definitely meet at the border of the Sword Continent and Bazhou. The war seemed to be unavoidable. The various factions within the Ba Prefecture and the Jin Prefecture were extremely nervous at this moment. The Sword's Gate and the Black Emperor sect were both overlord-level existences. As the various factions within the two prefectures, they naturally paid close attention to this war. However, overall, everyone favored the Black Emperor sect. No one felt that the Sword Sect could defeat the Black Emperor sect. After all, their strength was there for all to see. There weren't many people who knew about the increase in strength of the Sword Sect, especially those powers within the Bazhou. They didn't know about the changes within the Sword Sect, and only thought that the Sword Sect was the same as before, which was why the various powers within the Bazhou didn't have high hopes for the Sword Sect. The young sect leader of the Sword Sect really doesn't know what he's talking about. He actually dares to start a war with the Black Emperor sect. That's right. I don't think there's any suspense in this war. The Sword Sect will probably cease to exist after this. Sigh, what a pity. The Sword Sect used to be one of the top 10 Ling Tian sects back then. Now, it's in such a situation. There's no such thing as an everlasting power in this world. It was once glorious, but now it's in decline. It's very normal. The Sword Sect probably won't be able to escape this time. The various powers within the Bazhou believe that the Sword Sect would definitely not be able to escape this time and would definitely be annihilated by the Black Emperor sect. In the eyes of the world, the Sword Sect didn't have the ability to go against the Black Emperor sect. Moreover, the Black Emperor sect had launched a large-scale attack this time and didn't give the Sword Sect any chance at all. Many people seem to have already seen the scene of the Sword Sect being annihilated. In the face of the impending war between the two sects, countless people in the Great Thousand World were paying attention to it. Even the other four great sects, which were also first-rate powers like the Black Emperor sect, were paying attention to the war. In the He Prefecture, which was extremely far away from the Bazhou and the Jin Prefecture, two white-clothed old men were sitting opposite each other on a mountain peak that was surrounded by clouds. They were sipping tea as they spoke. The Black Emperor sect has indeed made a move on the Sword Sect. Looks like Sui, that old fellow, still hasn't forgotten about the Sword Sect's treasure. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. Chapter 1953. In the thousands of worlds, numerous people were watching the battle between the Sword Sect and the Black Emperor sect. No one had high hopes for the Sword Sect. Everyone felt that the Sword Sect would definitely lose. Under everyone's gazes, the experts of the Sword Sect and Black Emperor sect finally met at the border of the Jin and Bazhou. Leading the experts of the Sword Sect, Xiao Chun had been waiting there for a long time. On this day, the experts of the Black Emperor's sect arrived. There weren't many of them, only a few thousand. However, they were all experts. The 4 kings and the 7 martial marquises were all present. This time, the Black Emperor's sect came out in full force and didn't give the Sword sect any chance at all. In the sky, the experts of the 2 sects faced each other. As the sect leader of the Sword sect, Xiao Chun naturally stood in front of the crowd. Opposite Xiao Chun was He Sui, who was coldly sizing up Xiao Chun. "You are the little kid sect leader of the Sword sect?" He Sui obviously didn't care about Xiao Chun at all. In his eyes, Xiao Chun was too young and his cultivation was too low. Such a person wasn't worth He Sui's attention. Facing He Sui's question, Xiao Chun replied calmly, "That's right." Facing an end realm expert like He Sui, Xiao Chun naturally felt a lot of pressure. However, he had no choice and could only brace himself. The Black Emperor sect definitely wouldn't give the Sword sect any chance. Hearing Xiao Chun's reply, He Sui smiled. "Since that's the case, then bring the Sword sect to my Black Emperor sect. I won't treat you badly." The moment he opened his mouth, he wanted Xiao Chun to surrender. Hearing that, Xiao Chun didn't hesitate to shake his head and reject. Surrender? Do you think that's possible? It was obviously impossible to make the Sword sect surrender. Seeing that, a cold intent flashed across He Sui's eyes. He then said calmly, "Since that's the case, then don't blame me for being merciless." As he said that, Zhao Chunfeng and the other experts all released shocking auras. Since Xiao Chun wasn't willing to surrender, the Black Emperor sect naturally didn't need to hold back. Just as Zhao Chunfeng and the other experts from the Black Emperor sect were about to make their move, Xiao Chun, Cang Xing, Zhou Song, Wu Huan, and Nangong Wan also stepped forward. Their auras were no weaker than Zhao Chunfeng and the others. The 4 end realm experts felt the auras of Cang Xing and the others. He Sui, Zhao Chunfeng, and the others' expressions all changed. They didn't expect that the Sword sect would actually have 4 end realm experts. For end realm experts, such strength was enough to fight against the Black Emperor sect. Moreover, Cang Xing and the others who came out showed that the Sword sect had the advantage in terms of Dao realm strength. Originally, with the addition of Dong Hu and Yin Ling, the Sword sect already had 6 sword heads. At this moment, along with the help of the family Nangong, there were 2 family Nangong Dao realm experts who came along with Nangong Wan. With that, the Sword sect had 8 Dao realm experts. On the other hand, the Black Emperor sect only had 7 Dao realm experts. Originally, they had 8 martial marquises, but Marquis Jinbo had been killed by Xiao Chun. Now, the Black Emperor sect only had 7 Dao realm martial marquises left. His expression was a bit ugly. The strength of the Sword sect had completely exceeded his expectations. He stared at Xiao Chun, and at the same time, he swept his gaze over Cang Xing and the others. Nangong Wan, Wu Huan, Zhou Song. He Sui recognized Nangong Wan and the others. When he saw the 3 of them, he said coldly. When she heard He Sui's words, Nangong Wan laughed coldly. "He Sui, Xiao Chun is our junior brother. I advise you to stop. If you continue fighting, both sides will suffer." Xiao Chun was the junior brother of Nangong Wan and the others. When he heard this, a strange light flashed in He Sui's eyes. In the Great Thousand World, many people knew of Nangong Wan and the others' identities. They were the disciples of the Sovereign Emperor. Since Xiao Chun was their junior brother, didn't that mean that Xiao Chun was also the Sovereign Emperor's disciple? He Sui didn't expect this, but it was impossible for him to stop now. He Sui had come with great fanfare and then left without saying a word. That was why even though the Sword sect's strength was much stronger than he had expected, He Sui still didn't have any intention of retreating. He Sui's expression was ugly, and he no longer had his previous calmness. He said coldly, "So what? Today, I will definitely flatten the Sword sect. Kill." It was impossible for him to retreat so easily. Along with He Sui's words, the experts of the Black Emperor sect all attacked. Seeing this, Cang Xing, Nangong Wan, and the others naturally attacked as well. The experts of the 2 sects started fighting in the sky. Facing such a battle, Xiao Chun obviously couldn't interfere, not to mention a battle between End Realm experts. Even if it was a battle between Comprehension Realm experts, Xiao Chun didn't have much of a chance of winning. Xiao Chun didn't attack. The intense battle between the experts of the other two sects wasn't as one-sided as the Black Emperor sect had expected. On the contrary, the strength of the two sects was extremely close. For a moment, there was no clear victor. He Sui also didn't attack. Looking at the sword sect that had suddenly become so much stronger, He Sui's expression was extremely ugly. Thinking about it, it made sense. They thought that the sword sect was a piece of fatty meat that they could eat at any time, but now it had become a hard rock. This made the Black Emperor sect feel like they had nowhere to eat. Looking at the people in the intense battle, He Sui's expression became uglier and uglier. In the end, He Sui also chose to attack, charging towards Songxing. He Sui was also an End Realm expert. When he attacked, Songxing couldn't hold on for much longer. However, to kill an End Realm expert like Songxing wasn't an easy matter. In terms of End Realm experts, the Sword Sect wasn't as strong as the Black Emperor sect. However, apart from that, in terms of Dao Realm and Comprehension Realm, the Sword Sect was actually stronger than the Black Emperor sect due to the help of the family Nangong. With that, the direction of the battle gradually became clear. In terms of End Realm experts, the Black Emperor sect had the advantage. In terms of Dao Realm and Comprehension Realm, the Sword Sect had the advantage. Songxing tried his best to defend against the combined attacks of Zhao Chunfeng and He Sui. Although he wasn't their match, Songxing was still holding on. At the same time, in the Dao Realm level battle, the 7 martial marquises of the Black Emperor sect were slowly at a disadvantage under the combined attacks of Yang Song, Dong Hu, and the 2 family Nangong experts. Especially one of the martial marquises who was facing the combined attacks of Yin Ling and Xian Ling. He was already heavily injured, and the one-sided situation that he expected didn't appear. The 2 sides were fighting, and they were actually locked in a stalemate. All of a sudden, He Sui was furious. After all, this wasn't the result that he wanted to see. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1954. The main reason why He Sui dared to attack the Sword Sect with such fanfare was because the Sword Sect was too weak. With the Black Emperor's sect strength, it would not be too difficult to take down the Sword Sect. It was precisely because He Sui felt that it would be easy to take down the Sword Sect and would not make the Black Emperor sect pay too much of a price that he decisively attacked the Sword Sect. Otherwise, if he had to pay a huge price to take down the Sword Sect, He Sui would probably have to weigh the pros and cons. This was because if the Black Emperor sect suffered too great a loss, it would be unknown if they could continue to remain as a first-rate force, let alone become one of the top 10 Ling Tian sects. At that time, even if they took down the Sword Sect, the gains would not make up for the losses. Compared to the stable relationship between the top 10 Ling Tian sects, the competition between the first-rate forces was extremely intense. This was because they had already surpassed the ranks of the first-rate forces and had the possibility of becoming one of the top 10 Ling Tian sects. As such, who would not want to become an Ling Tian sect? Therefore, a first-rate force like the Black Emperor sect had to consider carefully before doing anything. It was very likely that they would fall out of the ranks of the first-rate forces if they were not careful. Originally, He Sui thought that the attack on the Sword Sect this time would be a sure thing, and they would be able to end the battle easily. However, from the looks of it now, He Sui had to admit that he had underestimated the Sword Sect. With the Sword Sect strength, the Black Emperor sect would definitely have to pay a heavy price if they wanted to take it down. To be honest, the Black Emperor sect could not afford to pay such a price. Although the Sword Sect's treasure was very tempting, He Sui was willing to give up the treasure if he had to pay the price of crippling the Black Emperor sect. However, He Sui was already in a difficult situation. The Black Emperor sect had come aggressively. If he retreated now, wouldn't he become a joke? Seeing that the battle had entered a stalemate, He Sui was furious and helpless. He really wanted to take down the Sword Sect in one fell swoop. However, based on the current situation, it was probably impossible. Even if he could take it down, the price that the Black Emperor sect had to pay would be at least a few times or even a dozen times more than what he had expected. Seeing the experts of the Black Emperor sect fall one by one, of course, the Sword sect also suffered many casualties. However, even though they had suffered the same number of casualties, Hiswei's heart was still bleeding. This was because they were in different positions. The Sword sect was fighting with their backs against the wall, so it didn't matter even if they were completely annihilated. However, the Black Emperor sect was different. It was impossible for the Black Emperor sect and the Sword sect to end in mutual destruction. Currently, the Sword sect had the same mentality. Didn't the Black Emperor sect want to take down the Sword sect? Alright, then both sides would suffer. At most, the Sword sect would be annihilated. However, the Black Emperor sect would definitely fall from the ranks of the super first-rate forces. At that time, let alone charging into the top 10 Ling Tian sects, it was hard to say if they could even protect themselves. At this moment, the Sword sect was willing to sacrifice themselves to drag the King of Hell down from his high horse. It was also because of the Sword sect's mentality that Hiswei was extremely furious. However, there was nothing he could do. The battle was still going on. Seeing the number of casualties from both sides increasing, Hiswei's mood became more and more uncomfortable. Even though Tsang Xing was already at the end of his rope, Hiswei still didn't feel any joy. This was because the price that the Black Emperor sect had paid had far exceeded Hiswei's expectations. Just as Hiswei was extremely furious, Xiao Chun, who didn't join the battle, suddenly spoke. Sect leader Hiswei, can we stop and talk? Xiao Chun took the initiative to speak with Hiswei. This was actually an act of helplessness. This was because if the battle continued, a martial marquis from the Black Emperor sect might die here. However, at the same time, Tsang Xing probably wouldn't be able to escape this calamity. Seeing that Tsang Xing had already reached his limit, Xiao Chun naturally couldn't just watch him die on the spot. Moreover, Xiao Chun had already achieved his goal. He used his actions to tell the Black Emperor sect that if they wanted to take down the Sword sect, they had to at least be prepared to lose their teeth. In this way, there was a possibility for both sides to negotiate. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Hiswei's expression was extremely ugly. However, he still shouted, "Stop!" Just like Xiao Chun, Hiswei didn't have any intention of continuing the battle. It was completely because the Sword sect's strength had surprised Hiswei. Hiswei couldn't possibly pay such a huge price in exchange for a Sword sect. If the battle continued, his Black Emperor sect would lose another Dao Realm Almighty. Therefore, Hiswei immediately chose to stop. Along with Hiswei's shout, the experts from the Sword sect and Black Emperor sect stopped one after another. Then, Xiao Chun and Hiswei came to the front of the two sides and stood opposite each other. Both sides were sizing each other up. Looking at Xiao Chun before him, apart from feeling that Xiao Chun was young, Hiswei also felt a strong sense of fear. This junior was indeed not simple. He had really underestimated him previously. Hiswei said coldly without any expression, "Sect leader Xiao Chun, your Sword sect is now like the sun setting in the west. Join my Black Emperor sect, and we'll charge into the 10 great Ling Tian sects together. Wouldn't that be great?" Hiswei's tone and attitude had undergone a subtle change. After all, the Sword sect was no longer a fat piece of meat in the mouth of the Black Emperor sect. It was meaningless to be as arrogant as before. Hiswei wanted a rope in the Sword sect. However, Xiao Chun shook his head and said, "Sect leader Hiswei, there's no need to think about letting the Sword sect join the Black Emperor sect. Everyone in the Sword sect would rather die in battle than to change sections." Xiao Chen's attitude was very unyielding. Of course, this was also because the Sword sect's strength had skyrocketed. If the Sword sect was still the same as before, Xiao Chen naturally wouldn't speak to Hiswei in such a manner. Moreover, if Hiswei didn't have the strength to make Hiswei fearful, he probably wouldn't waste his breath with Xiao Chun based on his character. It was because it was extremely difficult to take down the Sword sect now. Therefore, Hiswei chose to negotiate with Xiao Chun. Without strength, you didn't even have the qualifications to negotiate. After all, the other party could easily destroy you. So what right did they have to negotiate with you? Without the corresponding bargaining chip, the negotiation was naturally impossible. He knew very well what Hisui was thinking. He also knew that Hisui didn't want to continue fighting because the end result would only be a lose-lose situation for both sides. Such an outcome wouldn't benefit either the Sword's Gate or the Black Emperor's sect. A cold light flashed in Hisui's eyes when he faced Xiao Chen's unyielding attitude. Xiao Chun, do you really think that my Black Emperor's sect can't do anything to your Sword sect? I believe that the Black Emperor's sect can destroy the Sword sect. However, sect leader Hisui, can you bear the price? If you insist on fighting, I think that the Black Emperor's sect will probably fall from the ranks of the super first-rate forces. Xiao Chun said indifferently when he heard this. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1955. I remember it in 1 second. Exciting, no pop-up window, free reading. It was undeniable that the Black Emperor's sect had the ability to wipe out the Sword sect. After all, in terms of strength, the Sword sect and the Black Emperor's sect still had some differences. Not to mention other things, but just the number of End Realm experts. The Sword sect couldn't compare to the Black Emperor's sect. Including Hisui, the Black Emperor's sect had a total of 5 End Realm experts. Moreover, Hisui could be said to be the strongest existence in the End Realm. On the other hand, the Sword sect only had 3 End Realm experts. Even including Nangongwan, they only had 4. In terms of strength, they still couldn't compare to the Black Emperor's sect. However, Xiao Chun directly said that even if the Black Emperor's sect had the ability to wipe out the Sword sect, the price wasn't something that the Black Emperor's sect could bear. Or rather, Hisui wasn't willing to bear such a price just to wipe out the Sword sect. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, the coldness in Hisui's eyes became thicker and thicker. He stared right at Xiao Chun. Facing Hisui's gaze, Xiao Chun didn't back down and stare back at him. The two of them stared at each other. After a while, Hisui suddenly laughed out loud. Good. When new sect leader of the Sword sect, I have underestimated you. Before this, he had always treated Xiao Chun as a junior. However, it seemed like he was wrong. From a short contact he had with Xiao Chun, he could tell that this kid wasn't ordinary, especially his temperament. It made Hisui sigh in admiration. His methods were extremely shrewd and ruthless. His words hit the nail on the head. The current Xiao Chun was grabbing onto the Black Emperor's sect's weakness and didn't give Hisui any chance at all. Xiao Chen's attitude was very clear. If you want to fight, then fight. Anyways, when the Sword sect was wiped out, the Black Emperor's sect wouldn't have a good time either. Just as Xiao Chen said, Hisui was not willing to bear such a price, nor could he afford it. Therefore, it seemed meaningless to continue. Hisui once again looked at Xiao Chun after his laughter faded. The coldness in his eyes had completely receded. At this moment, Hisui seemed to be chatting with an old friend as he looked at Xiao Chun and spoke indifferently. It's fine if you wanted to stop, but shouldn't your Sword sect do something? After all, quite a few people from my Black Emperor's sect died this time. Hisui had already decided to give up, but it would be embarrassing if he just let it go like that. Therefore, he would definitely ask for some compensation. Of course, Hisui's purpose in asking for these compensations wasn't to obtain any substantial benefits from the Sword sect. Hisui himself knew that Xiao Chen wouldn't take out anything too precious. The reason he asked for this compensation was nothing more than to give himself a way out. After all, many sects in the Great Thousand World already knew about the war between the Black Emperor sect and the Sword sect. If there was nothing and the Black Emperor sect retreated, wouldn't it be a joke to the world? Therefore, asking for the so-called compensation from Xiao Chun was to save the Black Emperor sect's face. He wanted the world to think that the Black Emperor sect retreated because the Sword sect had given them compensation. The Sword sect had given in, and the Black Emperor sect didn't want to push them too far. Therefore, they chose to give up. Xiao Chun was naturally aware of what Hisui was thinking. Hence, Xiao Chun smiled faintly when he heard Hisui's words. After which, he took out a storage ring and handed it over to Hisui. Xiao Chen had already guessed that He Sui would definitely ask for compensation, so he was already prepared. When he saw Xiao Chun take out a storage ring, a strange look flashed across He Sui's eyes. He thought to himself, it seems like this kid has already planned this out. He's not simple with such wisdom. Xiao Chun had indeed planned this out. In the beginning, the sword sect didn't have any intention of compensating. The reason was very simple. At that time, He Sui simply didn't care about the compensation from the sword sect. At that time, He Sui wanted the entire alliance. Therefore, even if Xiao Chun took out compensation, it would be useless. However, it was different now. After this battle, He Sui had clearly seen the changes in the sword sect. He also knew that the sword sect was no longer a soft persimmon that could be easily pinched. As a result, if Xiao Chun took out a compensation that was based on the difference in status, as long as He Sui didn't take it seriously, he would definitely accept it. Just as Xiao Chun thought, He Sui accepted the storage ring without any hesitation when he saw Xiao Chun take out the storage ring. However, after He Sui checked the items in the storage ring, his expression became a little strange. The corners of his mouth curled into a smile, but the cold light in his eyes condensed again. The reason for He Sui's change was entirely because of the compensation that Xiao Chun gave him. He was simply treating him like a beggar. There were only 10,000 spiritual stones, and they were all middle-grade spiritual stones. Next were various types of elixirs, but the highest grade was only at the immortal grade. In addition, there were talismans, spirit fruits, spirit herbs, and other miscellaneous items. However, their value wasn't high. In the eyes of an expert at He Sui's level, the compensation that Xiao Chun gave was simply trash. None of it could catch his eye. It was indeed treating him like a beggar. However, in the face of He Sui's cold gaze, Xiao Chun didn't care at all. He continued to look at He Sui with a calm face. Xiao Chun had absolute confidence that even if He Sui was unhappy, he would definitely accept the storage ring. As expected, after coldly staring at Xiao Chun for a moment, He Sui laughed dryly and said, "Haha, sect leader Xiao Chun is too polite. How can I accept such a valuable gift?" Although He Sui said this, it wasn't difficult to tell from his expression that he was actually forcefully suppressing the anger in his heart. However, Xiao Chun acted as if he didn't see He Sui's anger and smiled faintly. "Sect leader He Sui is too polite. It's just a small token of my respect. After all, our sects are neighbors and we have to get along well in the future. As for this matter, it is indeed a misunderstanding. The death of Marquis Jinbo in the sword sect was a complete accident. It was also an unintentional mistake. I hope that sect leader He Sui can understand." Xiao Chun gave He Sui enough face and also gave him a way out. However, He Sui didn't feel good when he heard Xiao Chun's words, especially when he heard that Xiao Chun said that Marquis Jinbo's death was an accident. He Sui almost couldn't hold back the anger in his heart. Damn it, you ordered the death of Marquis Jinbo in front of so many people. Now, you're telling me that it was an accident and an unintentional mistake? Who would believe that? Looking at Xiao Chun, who didn't have a red face and wasn't panting, He Sui discovered that this person's skin was extremely thick. He didn't even have a red face and wasn't panting when he spoke nonsense. Taking a deep breath and forcefully suppressing the anger in his heart, He Sui revealed an extremely ugly smile and said, "Haha, since that's the case, I'll let it go this time. However, I hope that sect leader Xiao Chun will take care of yourself in the future." Of course. However, I also hope that when the guests of the Black Emperor's sect come to my sword sect in the future, it would be best to inform me first. Otherwise, if something like Marquis Jinbo happens again, I would really be letting sect leader He Sui down. Hearing this, Xiao Chun smiled and replied, "Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 1956. Xiao Chun did not care about He Sui's anger at all. When He Sui heard this, he snorted coldly and did not say anything else. He immediately left with the Black Emperor sect. He came aggressively, but the strength that the sword sect displayed made He Sui furious and shocked at the same time. It was no longer something that could be manipulated by others. As such, even if the Black Emperor sect still coveted the Sword sect, they would have to think twice before making a move on the Sword sect in the future. Moreover, there was another reason that made He Sui choose to stop, and that was Xiao Qin's identity as Jun Wuya's disciple. He Sui naturally knew about Jun Wuya. The strongest person in the Great Thousand World was not a joke. Although Jun Wuya did not belong to any sect in his life, it was not an exaggeration to say that Jun Wuya alone was enough to reach a great sect. In the Great Thousand World, only the 10 great Lingtian sects were qualified to go against Jun Wuya. A superforce like the Black Emperor sect was not qualified. Firstly, the strength of the Sword sect was beyond his expectations. Secondly, it was because of Jun Wuya. Therefore, He Sui chose to retreat. When the people of the Black Emperor sect retreated, Xiao Qin secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Although he knew that this was only temporary, at least the Black Emperor sect would not easily provoke the Sword sect for a period of time. This could be considered as giving the Sword sect some time to breathe. Xiao Qin came in front of the seriously injured Song Xing and asked with concern, "How are you? Are you all right?" "Sect leader, don't worry. I can still hold on," Song Xing said with some difficulty when he heard Xiao Qin's words. Song Xing was indeed difficult to deal with when facing the joint attack of Zhao Qinfeng and He Sui. If it was not for Xiao Qin stopping them in time, Song Xing would probably be in danger. Fortunately, although Song Xing's injuries were serious, at least his life was not in danger. As for the following period of recuperation, his injuries would naturally recover. Now that they had successfully blocked the Black Emperor sect, everyone in the Sword sect felt a lot more relaxed. Nangongwan also followed them back to the Sword sect. After safely arriving at the Sword sect, Song Xing went to rest, while Xiao Qin went to see Qin Shu and the other women. After reporting that they were safe, he and Nangongwan strolled around the Sword sect. This time, they had successfully blocked the Black Emperor sect. This was indeed good news for the Sword's Gate. Looking at the current disciples of the Sword's Gate, all of them felt elated. Even the Black Emperor sect could not do anything to the Sword's Gate. For a moment, the many disciples of the Sword's Gate felt a sense of pride from the bottom of their hearts. At the same time, because of this battle, Xiao Qin's prestige in the Sword sect had greatly increased. Although he was still young, Xiao Qin had brought changes to the Sword sect ever since he became the Sword sect leader. In such a short period of time, the Sword sect's strength had greatly increased. This made the disciples who were not very convinced of Xiao Qin's strength to accept him wholeheartedly. For the time being, the crisis had been averted. However, Nangongwan still reminded Xiao Qin, "Junior brother, we still have to guard against the Black Emperor sect." Nangongwan was worried that Xiao Qin would let down his guard against the Black Emperor sect, so she couldn't help but remind him. Although they had successfully forced the Black Emperor sect to retreat this time, the main reason for this was because He Sui had too many misgivings. Moreover, even if He Sui chose to retreat this time, this was only temporary. He Sui still coveted the Sword sect, but because the Sword sect's strength had increased, He Sui had some misgivings in his heart. However, once He Sui made a move against the Sword sect again, it wouldn't be so easy to deal with him. At that time, He Sui would definitely be fully prepared. Hearing Nangongwan's words, Xiao Qin nodded and said, "Senior brother, don't worry. I know." Xiao Qin naturally knew that the threat of the Black Emperor sect was far from being resolved. After all, the current Sword sect strength was still inferior to the Black Emperor sect. Therefore, He Sui still coveted the Sword sect. One was not afraid of thieves stealing, but one was afraid of thieves remembering. Therefore, to truly resolve the threat of the Black Emperor sect, there was still a long way to go. Of course, the most fundamental point was the strength of the Sword sect. If the Sword sect's strength could surpass the Black Emperor sect, then they naturally wouldn't have to worry about the threat of the Black Emperor sect. Xiao Qin was very clear about this point. Seeing that Xiao Qin didn't relax in the slightest because of this victory, Nangongwan also felt relieved. This was good. For the time being, they had a chance to catch their breath. What Xiao Chen needed to do next was to use this time to increase the strength of the sword sect and himself. Only then would they have the confidence to not fear the Black Emperor's sect. He was thinking about how to increase the strength of the sword sect. He had already used all the resources he could use. Next, if he wanted to increase the strength of the sword sect in a short period of time like before, it wouldn't be so easy. While he was thinking about what to do next, the outside world was in an uproar because of the battle between the Black Emperor sect and the Sword sect. Countless people were shocked by the result of this battle. Originally, they thought that the Sword sect would be doomed in the face of the Black Emperor sect's large-scale attack. But who would have thought that the Black Emperor sect would actually retreat after the battle between the two sides? Although the Black Emperor sect said that the Sword sect had compensated them, and that the matter of Jin Bo-ho was a misunderstanding, the people weren't stupid. They naturally knew that the matter couldn't be so simple. The so-called misunderstanding was just an excuse. After all, with the character of the Black Emperor sect, even if it was a misunderstanding, they absolutely wouldn't let the Sword sect go. Moreover, when Xiao Chun killed Jin Bo-ho, many people saw it with their own eyes. How could it be a misunderstanding? In the next few days, the news of the battle between the Sword sect and the Black Emperor sect quickly spread. All the major forces were shocked. The Sword's Gate had actually withstood the attack of the Black Emperor sect, forcing the Black Emperor sect to retreat helplessly. No one had expected such a result before the start of the war. However, the ones who were most shocked were the major forces in the Jian province. Originally, they were thinking that if the Sword sect was defeated this time, then the Jian province would probably fall into the hands of the Black Emperor sect from now on. Many people were already prepared to change sections. But who would have thought that the final result would be the Black Emperor sect retreating and the Sword sect wouldn't suffer too much of a blow? The result was unexpected, but it was undeniable that the Jian province would still be under the control of the Sword sect after this battle. Moreover, this situation might not change for a long time in the future. As for the major forces in the Jian province, if they wanted to survive in the Jian province, their only choice was to be loyal to the Sword sect. There was no other way. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1957. After temporarily resolving the threat from the Onyx Emperor sect, everyone in the Sword sect could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Xiao Chun naturally began to cultivate in seclusion again. As the sect master of the Sword sect, the resources Xiao Chun could use were naturally unimaginable in the past. In order to raise his cultivation as quickly as possible, Xiao Chun naturally wouldn't be stingy with these cultivation resources. There was a Heaven Spirit Pagoda in the Sword sect, and this Heaven Spirit Pagoda was the most suitable for Xiao Chun. According to Tsang Xing and the others, this Heaven Spirit Pagoda could help Xiao Chun break through to the realm of enlightenment. He prepared to enter seclusion in the Heaven Spirit Pagoda, but before that, Xiao Chun arranged for people to go to the Eight Desolates world to pick up Chen Yu and the others. After all, the matters in the Sword sect had basically stabilized. It was time to bring Chen Yu and the others over. After dealing with Chen Yu and the others, early in the morning, Xiao Chun, accompanied by Tsang Xing and Yang Song, arrived at the entrance to a small world in the depths of the Sword sect. The entrance to the small world led to the Heaven's Spirit Pagoda. Standing beside Xiao Chun, Tsang Xing said, "Sect Master, this Heaven Spirit Pagoda has a total of 7 floors. The spiritual energy in each floor is different. With the Sect Master's foundation, you can directly cultivate on the 7th floor." The Heaven's Spirit Pagoda was a cultivation treasure in the Sword sect. Normally, if the disciples of the Sword sect wanted to enter, they had to have enough contribution points. However, as the sect master, Xiao Chun naturally didn't need that. Moreover, Tsang Xing also suggested that Xiao Chun directly cultivate on the 7th floor because the spiritual energy there was the densest. It was also the most helpful for Xiao Chun's cultivation. Hearing Tsang Xing's words, Xiao Chun nodded slightly and said yes. Xiao Chun did not have to worry about the Sword sect for the time being. With Tsang Xing and the others handling it, Xiao Chun was very relieved. The most important thing now was to improve his own strength. Breaking through his own strength was the most important thing for Xiao Chun. After leaving the matters of the sword sect to Tsang Xing and Yang Song, Xiao Chun stepped into the Heavens Pagoda. It was said that the Heavenly Spirit Pagoda was a supreme treasure that could absorb and store the spiritual energy of the world. The heaven-breaking sword Venerable had obtained it in an ancient ruin. It had been left in the sword sect ever since, becoming one of the favorite cultivation realms for the disciples of the sword sect. After passing through the entrance, Xiao Chun directly entered the Heavens Pagoda. However, this was only the first floor. As far as the eye could see, there were many disciples cultivating on the side branches. There were many disciples cultivating on the first floor. After casually looking around, Xiao Chun did not stop and directly walked to the second floor. The Heavens Pagoda had a total of 7 floors. Every time you passed a floor, you had to show your identity token. Otherwise, you would not be able to pass. For ordinary disciples, if they wanted to go to a higher floor, they would need to have enough contribution points. Without contribution points, they would not be able to pass. However, Xiao Chun did not have this problem. With the heaven-breaking sword token in hand, Xiao Chun smoothly walked all the way to the 7th floor of the Heavens Pagoda. Compared to the first floor, where there were many disciples cultivating, the 7th floor was completely empty. Moreover, the area was much smaller than the first floor. However, in terms of spiritual energy, the 7th floor was at least 10 times more dense than the first floor. The spiritual energy was so dense that just taking a breath here would make one feel extremely happy. When Shui, Ro, and the others are done with their seclusion, I can let them come to the Heavens Pagoda to cultivate. The dense spiritual energy made Xiao Chun feel comfortable. At the same time, he secretly thought that he could let Qin Shu, Long Qing, and the others come to the Heavens Pagoda to cultivate in the future. After sighing softly, Xiao Chun sat down in the side branch, closed his eyes, and began to cultivate. This time, Xiao Chun's main purpose of seclusion was to make a breakthrough in his cultivation. Now that he was at the initial celestial emperor realm, Xiao Chun's goal was to make use of the dense spiritual energy on the 7th floor of the Heavens Pagoda to raise his cultivation to the great perfection celestial emperor realm. After that, he could use other methods to break through to the comprehension realm. With such rich spiritual qi, it would not be difficult for Xiao Chun to make a breakthrough in his cultivation. Moreover, in order not to damage his foundation, Xiao Chun had also made sufficient preparations. He had brought a lot of foundation establishing pills with him. The foundation establishment pill was not a high-grade pill. Its grade was only at the celestial skill level and had not surpassed the celestial grade. However, the foundation establishment pill could only be found in the Great Thousand World and had never been found in the 8 Wastelands world. The function of the foundation establishment pill was relatively simple. Its only function was to stabilize one's foundation. With the help of the foundation establishment pill, one's foundation would not be affected. This was also the reason why Xiao Chun dared to make a breakthrough so quickly. Otherwise, Xiao Chun would never do something so stupid as to damage his own foundation just because he wanted to make breakthroughs in his cultivation base quickly. We won't give the sword sect any time to prepare and catch them off guard, Lin Gang said coldly when he heard this. They didn't even intend to declare war on Swords Gate. Instead, they went straight to Swords Gate, and before Swords Gate was ready for battle, they would take down Swords Gate at lightning speed. This way, they would be able to reduce their losses. Hearing Lin Gang's words, Li Ku and the blood demon old man nodded in agreement. The three of them discussed for a while before they dispersed and began to prepare for the attack on the Sword Sect. In their opinion, with the three first-rate powers joining forces, they could even fight against the Black Emperor's sect. Taking down the Sword Sect wouldn't be a problem at all. The only problem was how many casualties they would suffer. They were full of confidence, but the three of them clearly didn't expect that the Sword Sect's development over the past decade had far exceeded their expectations. At the same time, the Sword Sect's current strength was far from what it was 10 years ago. Many experts had joined the Sword Sect, and many disciples had improved. All of these had caused the Sword Sect's strength to undergo earth-shattering changes. Therefore, even if the three first-rate forces joined forces, they might not necessarily be a match for the Sword Gate. This was because even Lin Gang and the other two had to admit that even if the three first-rate forces joined forces, they could only contend against the Black Emperor's sect. Compared to the Black Emperor's sect, the current Sword Gate was not much weaker. Moreover, the Sword Sect had a staunch ally, and that was the family Nangong. Therefore, this time, whether the three first-rate powers could take down the Sword Sect was still unknown. However, Lin Gang and the other two didn't realize this at all. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. Chapter 1961. The growth and transformation of the Sword Sect had far exceeded the trio's expectations. After the blood demon old man and Li Ke left, Hing quickly entered the main hall. He looked at Lin Gang and asked impatiently, "How is it, Valley Master?" In the Bloodblade Valley, the person who wanted to destroy the Sword Sect the most was not Lin Gang, but Hing. As a traitor of the Sword Sect, Hing hated the Sword Sect to the core. Of course, he hated Xiao Chen even more. If not for Xiao Chen, Hing would not have become a traitor from the Sword Sect's deputy sect master. There was no day and night that did not wish to destroy the Sword's Gate, but unfortunately, as the Sword's Gate grew stronger, the hope in He Ying's heart grew dimmer and dimmer. This time, when Lin Gangle said that the deceased Devil Sect and the Sky Sword Sect would join forces, He Ying was extremely excited. Seeing He Ying's excited expression, Lin Gang smiled and said, "Don't worry, we've already discussed it. We'll attack the Sword Sect in a few days." Hearing Lin Gang's words, a smile appeared on He Ying's face. At the same time, a deep hatred flashed across his eyes. Since the Sword Sect had betrayed him, they could not blame him for being disloyal, especially Xiao Chen. If he could take down the Sword Sect this time, He Ying could give up everything, but Xiao Chen had to be personally dealt with by him. When that time came, he would make sure that Xiao Chen begged for death. He Ying's smile grew even colder, as if he could already see Xiao Chen falling into his hands and being tortured to a state worse than death. According to Lin Gang and the other two, attacking the Sword Sect should be done as soon as possible. They could not allow the Sword Sect any time to react, nor could they give the Sword Sect any time to breathe. They had to take down the Sword Sect in one fell swoop. Because of this, Lin Gang, the blood demon old man, and Li Ku acted very quickly. In just 3 days, the three top forces were ready to attack the Sword Province at the same time. The three top powers worked together. Amongst them, there were 4 End Realm experts and 6 Dao Realm experts. As for Comprehension Realm and Celestial Emperor Realm experts, there were many of them. Added together, there were close to 10,000 of them. With so many people moving at the same time, it was also because Song Xing's group moved fast enough that Song Xing only received the news when the three forces had entered the Sword Sect. He learned that the Bloody Blade Valley, the deceased Devil Sect, and the Sky Sword Sect had joined forces to attack the Sword Sect. After hearing this news, Song Xing did not dare to delay and immediately told Xiao Chen about it. Within the main hall of the Sword Sect, Xiao Chen sat on the main seat. Below him were the 8 sword heads, including Song Xing, Zhou Song, Wu Huan, Lin Qing, and Yang Song.